York City. Here on this 4th of August, 1735, the long-delayed trial of John Peter Zenger is about to begin. He stands accused of the crime of libel against the person and character of His Excellency, Colonel William Cosby, governor of the provinces of New York and New Jersey. Informed observers believe that Zenger's chances for acquittal are dim. They point out that he is heavily handicapped. The governor controls the court, presided over by Chief Justice James Delancey. Zenger's 2 attorneys have been disbarred, and the Crown has appointed John Chambers, a young and relatively unknown attorney, to defend Zenger. This case has been waiting to come to trial for 8 months. It has attracted considerable attention both here and in England. There are many who see
August 4th, 1735, New York City. You are there.
John Peter Zenger, a colonial printer, stands before a government-controlled court determined to convict him for libel. CBS takes you back 214 years to one of the most celebrated trials in our nation's history, the trial which established our treasured heritage of freedom of the press. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. When CBS is there,
You are there.
You Are There, produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon, is based on historical fact and quotation. Walter Hamden plays Mr. Andrew Hamilton in today's broadcast. And now,
a crowded courtroom in colonial New York, and John Daly.
Action here in the colonies is about to begin. The courtroom is packed with people who have come from points as far away as Boston and Philadelphia to witness this trial. Chief Justice Delancey and his associate, Justice Phillips, have not appeared yet. So now to our CBS News headquarters for the trial and the latest developments in this dramatic case. Go ahead, Quincy Howe.
There's a lot more to this case than meets the eye. The issue is not just whether John Peter Zenger is guilty of libeling Governor Cosby. The larger question is, shall the people of these colonies have the right to protest against what they regard as arbitrary and oppressive rule of any and all Crown-appointed governors? 2 years ago, when Colonel Cosby became governor, he began to tax the people in what they considered a high-handed manner. It's also alleged that he suppressed their civil rights. When the colonists tried to get some relief in the city council, the governor removed the senior member of that body, the beloved and respected Rip Van Dam. When the people took their case to the courts, Governor Cosby replaced the Chief Justice, Mr. Lewis Morris, with Mr. James Delancey, who will preside over today's trial. Deprived of their normal avenues of protest, several influential New Yorkers got together and backed John Peter Zenger in issuing a newspaper, the New York Weekly Journal, which published many unsigned articles attacking the governor. 8 months ago, Cosby arrested Zenger on a warrant charging him with printing seditious libels, and Justice Delancey set the bail so high that Zenger had to stay in jail. If the jury finds Zenger guilty, the New York Weekly Journal will certainly go out of business. Also, many colonists believe that such a precedent will tend to discourage opposition to the government and will throttle a free press. Just a moment. The sheriff has brought Zenger into the courtroom, so back to John Daly.
Zenger is being led into the prisoner's dock, and the crowd has broken into a spontaneous demonstration. Zenger just waved at his wife, Mrs. Anna Zenger, who is sitting next to John Chambers, his attorney, and Don Hollenbeck is with Mrs. Zenger also, so over to Don Hollenbeck.
The bailiff seems to be quieting this demonstration for Zenger. Mrs. Zenger, is this the first time you've seen your husband since his imprisonment?
The first time. This is the first time.
And how do you think he looks?
Dreadful. Terrible. He's lost so much weight. So much.
Mrs. Zenger, there's been some talk that the articles in the journal, those that the governor specifically objected to, were not written by your husband. Is that true?
John printed the articles.
I know that, but they were never signed. Who actually wrote them?
That is what His Excellency would like to know. That is why he threw my husband in jail, to find out. He was sure he could make John tell who wrote the articles. Then he could punish them. Even if my husband didn't confess, the governor thought that with John in jail, the paper would be finished. But His High and Mighty Excellency failed in both his plots. John would not tell, and the journal kept on being printed.
Yes,
we never
it
stopped the
certainly did, and much of the credit for that belongs to you, Mrs. Zenger. And now that the trial's begun, how do you think it's going to go?
The jury will find my husband innocent. They must. If they convict John, the only weapon we have against Cosby and all the others like him is lost. Our voices choked off. We're struck dumb, and Cosby can run riot over us. And we will have neither the right to protest nor the voice to cry out with. But if John is acquitted, as I pray the Lord he will be, then men everywhere in America will be able to speak out as free men must speak out, without fear and freely.
Thank you, Mrs. Anna Zenger. Now the sheriff is asking that the aisles be cleared. It seems the trial is about to start, so back to John Daly.
The aisles are being cleared, and this place is taking on some semblance of order. Mr. Richard Bradley, the Attorney General who will prosecute Zenger, is standing at the Crown's table. He seems very complacent. He's smiling, and at the moment, setting his powdered wig at just the right position on his head. And now the bailiff has reached up to the judge's bench and is pounding the gavel. Chief Justice Delancey and Associate Justice Phillips are entering the courtroom from their chambers. They're going up to their places on the bench. The spectators have risen. Let's listen.
Oyez! The New York Supreme Court, term of August, in the 9th year of the reign of our sovereign Lord King George II, Justices Delancey and Phillips presiding. All those having business before this court draw near, give your attention, and ye shall be heard. Be seated.
The clerk will read the calendar. The Crown versus John Peter Zenger, printer of New York City. Mr. Attorney General, are you prepared for the Crown?
We are ready, Your Honor.
Mr. John Chambers, are you prepared for the defendant?
May it please Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. Chambers, what is it?
May I address Your Honors to say that I have just been advised that I am to have the cooperation of another attorney in the presentation of my case.
Another attorney, sir?
I ask, sir, that you declare to be qualified at this bar the distinguished member of the bar of our neighboring colony, Pennsylvania, Mr. Andrew Hamilton.
Andrew Hamilton will defend Zenger. Hamilton, the most distinguished, the most noted attorney in the colonies, is here in this courtroom, and he's going to help defend John Peter Zenger. He was sitting with Rip Van Dam. We didn't recognize him because we've never seen him before, but we certainly do know of his reputation. Mr. Hamilton rose when Chambers spoke his name. He has come forward to the bench. The spectators burst into spontaneous applause when they heard his name, and the bailiffs are now trying to quiet them. Their reaction is not at all surprising, for with Andrew Hamilton pleading his case, John Peter Zenger's cause is no longer hopeless. Hamilton is a brilliant trial lawyer. He has a long and remarkable record of courtroom victories. He is a man in his early 80s. Some time ago, he retired from active practice, but he apparently has come out of retirement to defend Zenger. Now, Zenger, the underdog, has at least a fighting chance. At last, the crowd has quieted down. Now, back to the bench.
Mr. Hamilton,
Your Honor, I am ready to take the oath.
The oath. Yes, of course, yes, the oath. Well, now raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that at this bar you will abide by the laws of our Lord and Majesty the King and all the ordinances pertaining to the trial of this case?
I do.
We welcome you to our bar, Mr. Hamilton.
I thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Hamilton is now taking his place at the defense table. If it were anyone else, Justice Delancey might possibly have refused the oath, but just couldn't refuse it to Andrew Hamilton. That's the gavel again. The trial will proceed.
The clerk will panel the jurors.
Robert Sinclair, Joseph Dillingham, Charles Osborne, Daniel Forsyth.
Objection, Your Honor.
Objection to what, Mr. Chambers?
I humbly move, Your Honors, that the sheriff be instructed to read the names of the jurors in the same order as they appear in the freeholder's book.
How is that? Are they not in that order?
No, sir, they are not. Some of the names that were last on the panel are now placed first.
Clerk, is it so? Look on that copy. Is it a true copy of the panel?
Yes, I believe it is.
Well, then how is it that some of the names are misplaced?
I have the list handed to me by the sheriff.
Yes. Well, then, I say someone must be in error. Yes. Well, now, put aside the list you've read and read the names from the freeholder's book in the order they do appear.
Yes, Your Honor.
Apparently, some attempt to obtain a jury favorable to the Crown has been frustrated. Normally, a jury is selected from a list of names known as the Freeholders' Book, and customarily the names are called in order. Here, however, someone evidently shuffled the names so that the list contained a number of men who are known to favor the governor. Whatever the reasons behind the maneuver, quite obviously it has failed. And now, as the clerk finishes reading off the true list, the jurors, most of whom are middle-class merchants and farmers, are filing into the jury box. And they're all in there now, standing and waiting.
Do you have any challenges, Mr. Chambers?
No, Your Honor. The defense is satisfied.
Yes. Mr. Attorney General, are you too satisfied?
That is the Crown.
Yes.
Of course, yes. The Crown is happy. Very happy indeed.
Well, swear in the jury.
Mr. Thomas Hunt, as foreman of this jury, do you swear that you shall well and truly try and true deliverance make between our sovereign lord the king and the prisoner at the bar whom you have in your charge, and a true verdict give according to your evidence? So help you God?
I do.
Gentlemen, the same oath which your foreman hath taken on his behalf, you and every one of you shall well and truly observe and keep on your honor. Repeat after me, I do.
I do.
Be seated.
The jurors now seat themselves, and the long-awaited trial of John Peter Zenger actually begins.
Mr. Attorney General, will you proceed?
Very pleased, Your Honor, that, gentlemen of the jury, the charge against the defendant, John Peter Zenger, is that he did willfully and maliciously print a false, scandalous, and seditious libel in which His Excellency, the Governor of this province, who is the King's immediate representative here, is greatly and unjustly scandalized as a person that has no regard to law nor justice. Such libeling has always been discouraged as a thing that tends to create differences among men, ill blood among the people, and oftentimes great bloodshed. There can be no doubt but that you, gentlemen of the jury, will condemn these practices and find the defendant guilty as charged.
Mr. Chambers?
Your Honors, gentlemen of the jury, my client, John Peter Zenger, pleads not guilty to the charge. We shall attempt to show that none of the alleged libels referred directly to any specific person. And we shall also point out that it is incumbent upon the Crown to prove that the defendant is the author of the said libels.
Your Honors, my respectable but very young colleague has stated that it is necessary for the Crown to show that Zenger personally is responsible for the appearance of the libels in the so-called newspaper he publishes. It shall be my happy duty to prove this beyond reasonable doubt. My witnesses will show...
may I be forgiven for interrupting the discourse of the learned attorney for the Crown?
What is the nature of your interruption, Mr. Hamilton?
May it please your honors, I will save the Attorney General the trouble of going further into the matter, for I do confess for my client that he both printed and published the statements set forth in the charges.
As you've heard, Mr. Hamilton has surprisingly admitted that Zenger printed and published the alleged libels. Now the Attorney General again.
As Mr. Hamilton has confessed the printing and publishing of these libels, I think the jury must find the verdict for the king.
Not so neither, Mr. Attorney General. There is more to this bargain. Now, I hope it is not our bare printing and publishing a paper that will make it a libel. You will have something more to do before you make my client a libeler, for the words themselves must be libelous, that is, false, scandalous, and seditious, or else we are not guilty.
Your Honors, I think nothing is plainer than that the words contained in the articles as pertaining to the governor are scandalous and tend to sedition. And if such a thing is not libel, I think it may be said that there can be no such thing as a libel.
May it please your honors, I must insist that what my client is charged with is not a libel. I observed just now that Mr. Attorney General, in defining a libel, made use of the words scandalous and seditious. But whether from design or not, I cannot say, he omitted the word false.
I repeat, a libel is still a libel, notwithstanding it may be true.
In this I must again differ with my honorable colleague. I point out to him that the indictment to which my client pleaded not guilty accused him of, I quote, a certain false, malicious, seditious, and scandalous libel. Now, Your Honor, the word false must have some meaning, or else how came it there? To show the court that I am in earnest, and to save the court's time and Mr. Attorney General's trouble, I will agree that everything Mr. Zenger printed about His Excellency the Governor is scandalous, seditious, and a libel, provided only that he proves them false. So it seems our work is now pretty much shortened. All the Crown is left to do is prove the word false, and we are guilty. If he is reluctant to do that, we shall take the task upon ourselves and prove them true.
Mr. Hamilton, you cannot be permitted to give the truth of a libel in evidence. A libel is not to be justified, for it is nevertheless a libel that it is true.
Your Honor, I'm sorry the court has so quickly decided upon this bit of law.
The law is clear. You cannot justify a libel.
With submission, I have seen the practice in very great court.
Mr. Hamilton, after the court have declared their opinion, it is not good manners to insist upon a point in which you are overruled.
Your Honor, I must insist on...
Use the court with good manners, sir. You are not to be permitted to argue against the opinion of the court.
Then I will say no more at this time.
Mr. Hamilton has now turned his back on the bench, almost deliberately it seems, and he is approaching the jury. Apparently he intends to skip the pleading, the evidence, and to go at once to the final summing up before the jury. Mr. Hamilton.
Gentlemen of the jury, it is to you we must now appeal. For witness, we are denied the liberty of proving the truth of the facts deemed libelous. Gentlemen, power may be justly compared to a great river. While kept within its bounds, it is both beautiful and useful. But when it overflows its banks, it bears down all before it, and it brings destruction and desolation wherever it comes. If then this is the nature of power, let us at least do our duty, and like wise men who value freedom, use our utmost care to support liberty. The only bulwark we have against lawless power, which in all ages has sacrificed to its wild lust and boundless ambition the blood of the best men that ever lived. As you see, I labor under the weight of many years and am borne down with the great infirmities of body. Yet, old and weak as I am, I should think it my duty, if required, to go to the furthest parts of the land where my service could be of any use in assisting to quench the flame of prosecutions that aim to deprive a people of the right of remonstrating, aye, and complaining too, against arbitrary attempts of the men in power. Men who injure and oppress the people under their administration Provoke them. Cry out and complain. And then make that very complaint the foundation for new oppressions and persecutions. Gentlemen, I make no doubt but your upright conduct this day will entitle you to the love and esteem of your fellow citizens. For every man who prefers freedom to a life of slavery will bless and honor you as men who have baffled an act of tyranny. Gentlemen of the jury, your impartial and uncorrupt verdict today will lay a noble foundation for securing to ourselves, our posterity, and our neighbors that to which nature and the laws of our country have given us a right, the liberty both of exposing and opposing arbitrary power by speaking and writing the truth. The question before the court, and you, gentlemen of the jury, is not of small nor private concern. It is not the cause of a poor printer, nor of New York alone, which you are now trying. No. It may, in its consequence, affect every free man in America. It is the best cause. It is the cause of liberty. The defense rests.
Mr. Attorney General, will you sum up for the Crown?
Well, that is, gentlemen of the jury, all that you have to consider is the fact that Mr. Zenger, the defendant, printed and published certain scandalous libels which reflected upon the integrity of His Excellency the Governor. Well, these are confessed. Well, yes, they are confessed. Well, now, I'm certain you must find the defendant guilty as charged. But yes, of course. The Crown rests.
Mr. Bradley's summation was brief, certainly. He seems to be stunned, still under the power of Mr. Hamilton's oratory. Chief Justice Delancey is about to begin his charge to the jury.
Gentlemen of the jury, my charge to you shall be most brief. I wish to remind you that as the facts or words in the charges are confessed, the only thing that can come in question before you is whether the words as set forth in the charges constitute a libel. Now, as that is a matter of law, you may leave that question in the hands of the court. In other words, gentlemen, you, as a jury, have only to decide facts, not law. The facts being confessed, your duty is obvious. Bailiff, remove the jury to its chamber for deliberation. The court will recess.
Chief Justice Delancey and his charge to the jury practically instructed it to bring in a verdict of guilty against John Peter Zenger. There's a confusion of emotions here in this courtroom, a mixture of fear and of hope. Don Hollenbeck has made his way to the defense table. He is at Mr. Andrew Hamilton's side, so now over to Don Hollenbeck.
Mr. Hamilton, that was a most eloquent and moving summation. How were you brought into this case? Who brought you here?
I was first informed of Mr. Zenger's predicament by Mr. Rip Van Dam.
And what verdict, sir, do you think the jury will bring in?
I think they will find as their conscience instructs them.
But even if they do find Zenger not guilty, won't they expose themselves to retaliation by the governor and his party? After all, even after this trial, these men will still have to live here in New York City.
Yes, and they must now determine just how they shall live, whether as free citizens or as slaves.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew Hamilton. And now here's Mrs. Anna Zenger. Mrs. Zenger, did you know that Mr. Hamilton was going to be here today, that he was going to defend your husband?
No. It was a complete, a wonderful surprise. His words were great words. No matter how the trial comes out, no matter what happens now, I should like to acknowledge the deep debt that my husband and I owe to Andrew Hamilton. He is wonderful.
Thank you, Mrs. Anna Zenger. The bailiff is calling the court to order now, so back to John Daly.
The bailiff's call for order is no doubt the signal that the jury is returning. Of course, the jury will not be allowed to return to the courtroom until order is complete here, and there's been a great deal of excited chatter and comment about the magnificent summation of Mr. Hamilton. However, now the people are returning to their seats, are nearly all seated. The judges, as a matter of fact, are entering the courtroom and taking their places. The jury has reached its verdict in a remarkably short time, and yes, here come the jurors now. They're filing into the jury box. The spectators have finally cleared the aisles and are all in their seats, those who have seats. Justice Delancey is looking over to the jury box, waiting for the jurymen to get finally settled. Now there's a sudden hush over the courtroom. There's the gavel and back to the bench.
You may proceed, Mr. Cock.
Gentlemen of the jury, have you agreed upon a verdict?
We have.
Do you find the defendant, John Peter Zenger, guilty of printing and publishing the libels as charged?
We find John Peter Zenger not guilty.
Not guilty. The verdict is not guilty. John Peter Zenger has been acquitted of the charges against him. The principle that truth can be used as a defense against the charge of libel is upheld. Zenger is free. The courtroom here is in an uproar. People are rushing forward to congratulate Zenger and Hamilton. Mrs.
August 4th, 1735. John Peter Zenger is acquitted, and the American colonies win a free press to spearhead their fight for independence.
You have been listening to the trial of John Peter Zenger, another broadcast in the series You Are There, produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon. The trial of John Peter Zenger was written by Irv Tunick and Mr. Cheon. Walter Hamden played Mr. Andrew Hamilton. Inga Adams was Anna Zenger. D.A. Clark Smith was Justice Delancey. Bernard Lenroe played Attorney General Bradley. Richard Newton was John Chambers, and the cast included Guy Sorel, Bert Cowlin, Van Marlowe, and others. Next week,
October 4th, 1066, England. The Battle of Hastings. You are there.
CBS is proud of its Sunday programming, which brings you distinguished drama like You Are There and fine music from the New York Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra, which follows over most of these stations. CBS Sunday nights are filled with a remarkable array of talent as well. Tonight, for example, over most of these CBS stations, you will hear Van Johnson starring on the Prudential Hour. You'll hear Spike Jones, Amos and Andy, Dashiell Hammett's Sam Spade, Broadway's Helen Hayes, and Hollywood's Eve Arden. They'll all be here tonight, and in case you think we've made a big omission, Jack Benny will be here on all of these stations with his guests, Claudette Colbert and Vincent Price. This is CBS, Jack Benny's radio address, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Speaking to you from Old Bailey Courthouse in the heart of the city of London. Here on this late afternoon of September 5th, 1670, the legal battle that has aroused all England nears its final, its climactic hour. The jury is about to return for the third time in the case of the Crown versus William Penn, the well-known Quaker leader. That jury has been out for the past 6 hours, locked up by order of the court, without food, without drink. We still don't know if they'll stand fast, stick to their guns, defy the pressure and the prestige of this court, and once again, as they've done twice before, bring in a verdict that absolves young Penn of any criminal guilt. If the jury remains firm, unyielding, then here in Old Bailey, the Crown will suffer a stunning defeat. If the jury gives in, changes their verdict, then, as everyone knows, not only will the government of King Charles II achieve a considerable triumph, but the entire principle of trial by a free and independent jury may go into the discard for centuries to come. Word has come from the jury room that their deliberations are over. They're ready once again to deliver a verdict. We're waiting now for the court to reassemble. The crowds here are all in their seats. The soldiers...
September 5th, 1670, Old Bailey, London. The trial of William Penn. You are there.
CBS takes you back 280 years to the trial of William Penn, 12 years before he founded Pennsylvania. The charge? Speaking to an unlawful assembly of people and inciting them to riot. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. With all the modern facilities of radio present and CBS newsmen reporting from the scene,
you are there.
You Are There is based on historical fact and quotation.
1670, Old Bailey Courthouse, London, and Bill Leonard.
Since this trial began 5 days ago, we here in Old Bailey have been witnessing a legal battle that's unique in the history of English law. It began as a simple, commonplace action, no different from the hundreds of cases throughout England in the government's campaign to wipe out all dissension from the established Church of England. But all this has changed in the 3 days since this trial began, and no longer is Penn himself the focus of attention. It is the jury now. We're waiting for them to appear in this courtroom. Those 12 plain, hitherto unknown citizens of London. Twice they've returned to this courtroom with a verdict that finds Penn guilty only of speaking in Grace Church Street 2 weeks ago, August 14th, 1670. Twice the court has refused to accept this verdict because the verdict is not to the indictment. The question is not whether Penn spoke in Grace Church Street. This in itself is no crime, but whether he was criminally liable because he addressed an unlawful assembly and was disturbing the peace. Sir Samuel has sent them back to amend their verdict. They have refused. They've been stormed at by the court. They've been threatened. But still, up to now, in any event, the jury has remained firm, steadfast. They've refused to alter their verdict one word. That's the situation now at this moment, this tense, expected moment. The court is reassembling. It's reassembling. The 10 justices are entering the chamber. Sir Samuel Starling in the lead. Tall, austere-looking man. William Penn is being brought into the chamber now by the jailer. And, yes, here comes the jury. They're filing in, taking their places on the 2 rude planks that serve as benches. We're about to get underway.
Oyez, come to order. All those having business before this court, draw near, give your attention, and you shall be heard.
Sir Samuel Starling is whispering something to the recorder. Sir John Howell, both look toward the jury box. Cold, hard looks. They're ready.
Gentlemen of the jury, are you agreed upon a verdict?
We are, my lord.
That was Thomas Fear, the foreman of the jury.
The prisoner will rise. Face the jury.
Young William Penn, he's only 26, you know. Evidently taking this ordeal quite well. He's tall, well-built, well-dressed, complexion very ruddy.
Gentlemen
even now after
of the
weeks
jury, look upon the prisoner at the bar. Is William Penn guilty of the matters whereof he stands indicted, or not guilty?
My lord, we find William Penn guilty of speaking in Grace Church Street.
Once again, for the third time, the jury has come in with that same inconclusive verdict the court refused to accept. Back to the bench.
Gentlemen, quiet in the court. Gentlemen of the jury, is that all the verdict you have to give?
That is all the verdict I am commissioned to give.
Now Sir Samuel is leaning over,
talk to one of the other judges, Sir John Howell, the recorder. Sir John is shifting some papers on his desk. The crowd's getting very quiet now. Sir John's about to speak.
Mr. Deere, you're the foreman of the jury. Did the jury not consider it an unlawful assembly? Was it not that William Penn was speaking to a tumult of people?
My commission does not go beyond the verdict I have given.
It is no verdict.
Your Honor.
William Penn is speaking.
Your Honor, the agreement of 12 men is a verdict in law. And such a one being given by the jury, I ask that the clerk record it.
My lord, you must take a course with this fellow.
If Your Honor pleases, if this jury is forced to bring in another verdict.
Jailer!
Another verdict contrary to this, I say
Jailer!
they will be perjuring.
Stop his mouth! Make him keep his peace!
Gentlemen of the jury,
Sir Samuel Starling,
I have charged you 3 times before. This will be the 4th time. I hardly think it necessary to remind you that it will also be the last time. Remember, gentlemen, according to the indictment, William Penn, with divers other people, to the number of 300, did assemble and congregate in the street called Gracechurch Street, unlawfully and tumultuously, and in contempt of His Majesty the King, his crown, and dignity. Now, to prove this charge, the Crown has introduced a number of most credible and trustworthy witnesses. Unless you be blind and deaf, which I take it you are not, the facts must be known to you. Yet 3 times you have brought me in a verdict that is no verdict at all. It is no verdict to say that William Penn is guilty of speaking in Gracechurch Street. You must say that he is guilty of speaking in Gracechurch Street to an unlawful assembly. Do you understand that? To an unlawful assembly. I warn you, sirs. No, better, I advise you, all you gentlemen of the jury, not to play upon the patience of this court. Go out now and return to me a decent verdict. Bring me the verdict I ask, or by my oath you shall starve, you shall rot in prison. You shall be carted around the city as was done in ancient times. Bring me my verdict. Now get out. This court is recessed.
Lord Mayor has to respect the court. Soldiers are herding the jurymen into the jury room. Jurymen are protesting, but they're just being shoved, pushed in. They're being shoved through the door. There's no way to tell just when the jury will return with its 4th and doubtless its final verdict. We're prepared to stay with the trial, of course, right to the end. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a few blocks from here, at the Inns of Court, Quincy Howe has been speaking with some of England's top lawyers, top jurists, on the legal aspects of the trial. He has a report for us now, so we take you to the Inns of Court and Quincy Howe.
This is Quincy Howe, reporting from this traditional center of legal training and practice, where many of England's foremost barristers and jurists show deep concern over the events now taking place at Old Bailey. Sir Hartley Pomeroy, for instance, says that an intimidated jury is no longer a jury in the tradition of Magna Carta. It is nothing but a tool of tyranny. Lord Glastonbury, on the other hand, believes that the court has stayed well within its rights, and that Sir Samuel Starling's position is well taken. In times of emergency, according to Lord Glastonbury, certain legal niceties may be suspended. One episode in particular has come in for considerable discussion here at Inns of Court. The now famous hat incident. Some legal experts assert that that bit of business immediately established the prejudice of the court against the defendant, against William Penn. It happened, as you may remember, on the first day of the trial. When Penn was brought into the courtroom, one of the attendants, knowing that Quakers never removed their hats as an acknowledgement of authority, snatched Penn's hat from his head and pushed him toward the bench. Now here, by tape recording, is what occurred then, and the first voice you hear will be that of Sir Samuel Starling.
Sheriff, Your Honor, who bid you pull off this gentleman's hat? put it on again.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Penn, do you know this is the King's court?
I know it to be a court. I suppose it to be the King's court.
Do you know there is respect due the court?
Yes.
Why do you not pay it, then?
I do pay it.
Why do you not pull off your hat, then?
Because I do not believe that to be any sign of respect.
Oh. Well, the court so deems it to be. The court sets 40 marks upon your head as a fine for contempt of court.
I desire it might be observed that when I came into the court, my hat was taken off. And it has been put on since, by order of the bench, not by my own action. Therefore, not I, but the bench should be fined.
So that's why, in the view of some legal experts, the court has assumed from the very start a hostile, even they say a biased attitude toward William Penn. Still more serious, according to these experts, is the fact that the court has adopted these same hostile tactics toward the jury. They take the position, these experts do, that the pressure, the coercion as they call it, of the jury by the bench is something new, something novel. Such things as locking the jury up without food or drink, using threatening language. As some experts see it, all this adds up to a dangerous threat to the whole structure of English law. They feel, therefore, that what's on trial at Old Bailey is not just one man or even one minority religious creed. They say that what is at stake is the very cornerstone of traditional English justice, trial by a free, unfettered, independent jury. It's for this reason that here at Inns of Court, and indeed throughout England, all eyes are on the 12 men who are at this moment deliberating in the Old Bailey jury room. In the courtyard outside the Old Bailey is Don Hollenbeck, who has with him William Penn's fiancée, Miss Gulielma Springett, and the well-known Quaker leader, Mr. Thomas Elwood, formerly secretary to the poet John Milton. So we now go to the courtyard outside Old Bailey and Don Hollenbeck.
Miss Springett, what do you think? Will the jurymen give way to the demands of the court? Will they find your fiancé, William Penn, guilty of speaking before an unlawful assembly, inciting people to riot?
I hope they'll have the courage to uphold their verdict. I'm praying they will.
Thanks, Mr. Elwood.
William says I.
Mr. Elwood, please. Mr. Elwood, may we ask your opinion, sir?
If they're worth the name of Englishmen, they'll act like Englishmen and not be horsewhipped into doing what they don't believe in doing.
Horsewhipped? Here now, listen to who's talking about horsewhipping.
I'm sorry, madam, if you please. If you don't mind, I'll be glad to speak with you in a moment, but not now.
I can tell you about these Quakers.
I'm sorry, Miss Springett.
We understand such interruption. It's nothing new to us.
These aren't very easy times for Quakers, are they?
You must know, friend, that 15,000 of our innocent have been imprisoned in 20 years. 450 have perished in jail.
Yes, I understand, Mr. Elwood, that some of your persuasion are thinking of emigrating to the New World, to America.
And good riddance.
That is true. Some are already there. Others plan to go.
William has spoken of going to America many times.
I understand you both were present at Grace Church Street when William Penn was arrested.
He should have been. Yes. We went to the meeting house together. Came openly to our meeting house. When we arrived, we found troops stationed at the door, refusing us entry.
What a foolish thing to do.
Foolish thing indeed.
We who call ourselves friends need no set room to find our love of God, nor any particular person to show us his way. So when the soldiers barred the way to the meeting house, we held our meeting in the open street. William Penn was moved by the Spirit to stand up and address us. His words attracted many who listened with good behavior until the troops came and hauled Penn off to prison. There was no riot or incitement. Why should there ever be when a friend speaks?
Listen to him, you old liar.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Mr. Elwood, and you, Miss Springett.
Thank you.
It's the jury. It's what the jury does. All English freedom depends on what the jury does.
Yes, and thank you very much. And now, madam, we'll be very glad to talk with you.
I think the polite one, though. I'm honored, I'm sure.
May we have your name?
The name is Blodgett, Margaret Blodgett.
Mrs. Blodgett?
Miss Blodgett.
Ah, yes, Miss Blodgett. I guess you don't approve of the Quaker persuasion.
It's a feeble lot of liars, they are. Like that one you had here, the skinny one.
You mean Mr. Thomas Elwood?
If that be his name, that be him.
You think he wasn't telling the truth?
About the meeting I'm talking about.
Him saying it was so peaceful, with just nothing but prayers and sermons. It wasn't nothing like that, I can tell you.
Oh, you know about the meeting, did
That
you?
I do. A disgraceful tumult it was. People rioting and shouting and breaking up the peace. Just like Sir Samuel said it was.
You know that for a fact?
Bodies heaped on the street, blood flowing.
Yes, you saw all this
A disgrace
yourself?
it was. Enough to make peaceful folks shudder and tremble.
You were there yourself, Miss Blodgett. Did you see all this yourself?
Well, not exactly. It was a friend of my cousin's who was there, but she told my cousin exactly what happened, and she's a truthful soul, she is.
Ah, yes, but you personally weren't present. You didn't see any rioting yourself.
There were soldiers there, weren't there? When there's soldiers, there's got to be rioting. It's troublemakers, a lot of them are. Just troublemakers. If you ask me, I'll tell you what to do with them. Hang them. Hang the lot of them. And if that jury don't do what the judges tell them to do, then, says I, hang the jury. Hang them all!
Thank you, Miss Blodgett. Thank you. I've just been informed now that Ned Calmer has been able to arrange an interview with Lord Arlington, the King's Minister of State. So we take you now to the Palace of Whitehall and Ned Calmer.
Just a few seconds ago, Lord Arlington, the Secretary of State, one of the most influential members of His Majesty's cabinet, passed by on his way to the royal chambers, and I asked him to spare us a minute or two. He has kindly consented. As you know, sir, the jury is still out in the case of the Crown versus William Penn. Do you think they're going to change their position and bring in a verdict that will find Penn guilty of addressing an unlawful and tumultuous assembly?
Yes, I would say that the chances are that they will see the light. Yes, I think the chances are quite good. Sir Samuel has, shall we say, enlightened them to a considerable degree.
Then you feel his actions in this trial are justified?
Justified? Oh, demanded is the word. These are our trying times. The land is in a ferment.
You think then, sir,
21 years ago, we saw the most heinous of crimes committed in this country. The killing of a king, His Majesty Charles I, by the illegal Rump Parliament. For 10 years thereafter, we suffered under the rule of Cromwell, until justice prevailed and King Charles II was restored to his legal heritage in 1660.
It's your impression then, Lord Arlington, that the Quakers have been responsible for all this unrest you speak of?
No, not that precisely. Not all of it. But the basis of the revolt against King Charles I was a similar form of religious dissension. A peaceful nation requires the establishment of authority, a single authority to keep it peaceful. One law, one king, one church.
And in view of all this, Lord Arlington, you believe, therefore, that the legal protection of trial by an independent jury should not be extended to the Quakers?
Oh, my dear man, what are the little liberties of little people as against the interests of the state?
Indeed.
Yes, indeed. Oh, trial by jury, by any kind of jury, is a luxury we can afford only in normal times. I tell you this, I will gladly let 1,000 innocent men rot in the tower if among them there is one that plots treason. Now, if you will excuse me, I must not keep His Majesty waiting.
Of course. Thank you, Lord Arlington. This is Ned Calmer returning you now to Bill Leonard at Old Bailey Courthouse.
The jury is ready to return with its verdict. Court is reassembling. Word has come that agreement has been reached in the jury room, that the verdict, the fourth verdict that Sir Samuel Starling has emphasized must be the last and binding verdict, has been reached.
All rise.
The 10 presiding justices are entering the court chamber, taking their place at their desks, which are set in a semicircle on a slightly raised dais. See Sir Samuel Starling coming in first, taking the center desk. That's the one, of course, reserved for the presiding justice. The gilded canopy surmounted by the royal arms hangs above him. On the wall behind him, the sword of justice. All the 10 judges are at their desks now. John Howell, the recorder. Sir John Robinson, the Lord Lieutenant of London Tower. 4 aldermen, 3 sheriffs. They're at their places now. Over to the bench.
Oyez, come to order. All those having business before this court, draw near, give your attention, and you shall be heard. Be seated.
Bring the prisoner, William Penn, to the bar.
William Penn is being brought in. Court attendants taking him down a flight of stairs leading from the rear of the chamber into the well of the courtroom here. Now the jury's coming in. 12. Very tired, very harassed, mighty worried gentlemen. See their foreman, Thomas Veer, wiping his large bald head with a huge kerchief. He's perspiring and evidently under a tremendous strain. The jury's taking their seats now.
Gentlemen of the jury,
Sir Samuel Starling.
Are you agreed upon a verdict?
We are, my lord.
What say you? Look upon the prisoner at the bar. Is William Penn guilty of the matters whereof he stands indicted, or not guilty?
Here is our verdict, written and attested upon this sheet of paper.
Evidently, the jury wants its verdict on paper.
Give the paper.
Legally attested.
Clerk.
Thomas Veer is handing the verdict to the clerk now. Veer seems very nervous. He's biting his lower lip.
The clerk
noticeably
will deliver the verdict to the bench.
Clerk's taking the paper to Sir Samuel Starling. He has it now. Still folded. He hasn't read it. He's just staring at the jury. No expression on his face. Now, very, very slowly, he looks down at the paper, unfolds it. He's read the verdict. He's giving no sign. Just hands the paper to John Howell, the recorder, sitting at the desk next to him. Howell's looking at it. He hands it to the next justice. The verdict's making the rounds, being handed from desk to desk. But nothing's being said. No announcement's being made. Very unusual. Everyone hears at the edge of their seats. The foreman of the jury, Thomas Veer, still standing. Nervous, of course he is, but he's standing erect. In the jury box, they're sitting like statues, looking toward the bench, toward Sir Samuel, and John Howell, and the other 8 justices. And now Sir Samuel once again stares at the paper with the verdict. Now he's putting it down. I think he's going to talk you over to the bench.
Gentlemen of the jury, beyond this verdict, there can be no other. The bench is desirous of learning in open court whether this verdict was openly and honestly arrived at. And so each of you on the jury will now, in public, reaffirm the decision attested on this paper and arrived at secretly in the jury room. You may still change your mind. If so, it is my desire to give you the opportunity to speak your true mind and render your true verdict. I will ask each of you to answer individually, to call out personally your verdict, so that there may be no mistaking, so that we may see and hear each of you give down your decision. Do you understand? Clerk, poll the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. Thomas Veer. Not guilty.
Not guilty. Not guilty. Thomas Veer, foreman of the jury, votes not guilty. This clearly means that is the verdict written on the paper. And nothing ambiguous about this verdict as there was with the previous ones. The jury's no longer saying that Penn is guilty of speaking in Grace Church Street, a thing which in itself is no crime, something for which he couldn't be punished and not be imprisoned. This time they've come out with a verdict that is to the indictment. They find Penn not guilty. The question is, will they stand firm? Can all of them stand firm? If one of them, just one, gives way, if one of these jurors should call guilty as he's being polled, this verdict will be thrown out of court, upset. Quite possibly a mistrial will be called, and Penn once again will be imprisoned to wait upon another trial. It's up to those jurors now, to each of them individually. Will they stand? Will they stand firm? Or will they give way? The crowd has quieted. The jury is continuing to be polled now by the clerk.
Edward Bushel.
Not guilty.
John
Hammond. I. Not guilty. Henry Henley.
Not guilty.
The first four jurors have stood their
Henry
ground.
Michel.
Not guilty.
John Brightman. Not guilty. Charles Milton.
Not guilty.
No one, not one has switched yet. Not
Gregory
one of them.
Walcott.
Still have 5 to go.
Not guilty.
Now there are only
John
4.
Bailey.
Not guilty.
3.
William Lever. Not guilty.
Just 2 more now. 2 more juries to go.
James Damask. Not guilty.
Well, this is it. This is it now. The last juror. The last one will be pulled.
William
He
Plumstead.
stands firm. If he stands firm, William Penn will be acquitted. If he switches, Penn is doomed.
William Plumstead.
Not guilty.
You heard it. You heard it. Not guilty. Not guilty. The jury here has stood up against all the pressure, all the authority of the bench. They haven't wavered. They've stood firm. Penn is free. William Penn is acquitted. He's free. The verdict stands. Not guilty. The trial is over. Penn has rushed over to the jury box. He's shaking the hands of the jurors. Darling, how old is he?
September 5th, 1670. The jury in the case of the Crown versus William Penn refuses to bow before the pressure of the court. Penn is acquitted, and the concept of trial by a free and independent jury is reaffirmed. You are there.
You've been listening to the trial of William Penn in the prize-winning series, You Are There. Today's program was written by Irv Tunick, directed by Mitchell Grayson, and produced by Sam Abelow. You Are There is a presentation of the CBS documentary unit under the supervision of Werner Michel. Philip Burniff was heard as William Penn, Barry Kroger as Sir Samuel Starling, Joan Smith as Gulielma Springett. Others in the cast, Ian Martin, William Podmore, Adelaide Klein, Guy Sorrell, and Robin Craven. You Are There is brought to you every 4th Sunday. The next broadcast will be heard at the same time 4 weeks from today over most of the same CBS stations. Next month,
September 7th, 1853, Broadway Tabernacle, New York City. The Women's Rights Convention. In the face of raucous opposition, the struggle for equal rights for women advances in America. You are there.
next week at this same time, the Main Street Music Hall, starring Bill Tabbert of South Pacific with Alfredo Antonini and his orchestra, will return over most of these same CBS stations. CBS also invites you to join Abe Burrows, Lyman Bryson, and John K. M. McCaffrey every Sunday when they appear on a new kind of quiz show. We Take Your Word, a program that's based on the words and phrases we use every day. We Take Your Word is heard every Sunday night on most of these same CBS stations. This is CBS, where you laugh at Jack Benny every Sunday night, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
With this broadcast, Columbia resumes its prize-winning series, You Are There. Authentic reenactments of historic events, dramatically reported by CBS newsmen.
This is John Daly in Richmond, Virginia. On this first day of September 1807, the nation may soon learn whether Aaron Burr, former Vice President of the United States, is acquitted of treason or found guilty and sentenced to death. This is the 28th day of Colonel Burr's trial here in the 5th District Federal Court, and the climax is expected in an important legal decision by the presiding judge. Supreme Court Justice John Marshall is going to rule on a point of law on which may depend Aaron Burr's very life. Tempers are at fever pitch in this trial-obsessed city. Richmond, like the entire country, is divided between those who believe Colonel Burr is guilty and should hang, and those who are just as convinced that he is innocent. As we reported yesterday, Judge Marshall will convene this court at noon, a few minutes from now, and rule on the motion by Colonel Burr's attorneys. The defense contends that the whole basis of the government's case is untenable, since it has not been able and has not considered it necessary.
September 1st, 1807, Richmond, Virginia. You are there.
Aaron Burr on trial for his life. CBS takes you back 142 years to the event that established a precedent for the American concept of treason. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. With all the modern facilities of radio present at the trial, and CBS newsmen reporting from the scene.
You are there.
You Are There is based on authentic historical fact and quotation. And now,
Richmond, September 1st, 1807. A crowded federal courtroom and John Daly.
The government will be permitted to go on with its case against Colonel Burr depends upon the decision Justice Marshall is to make this morning. The motion by the defense, if granted, would stop the prosecution from putting any more witnesses on the stand. And if Judge Marshall rules in favor of that motion, well, then it will be tantamount to a direction from the bench that the jury acquit Colonel Burr. As you know, the court is sitting in the hall of the Virginia House of Delegates. It's stifling hot here in the courtroom, and the spectators, jammed into every available seat, are mopping their faces, waiting impatiently for today's session of the trial to resume. As usual, today's audience is made up largely of men in rough woolen shirts, trousers of homespun, with their hair tied in queues, frontier fashion. Nearly all of them are followers of President Jefferson's party, the Democratic Republicans, and they seem to be solidly behind the prosecution, which is demanding Aaron Burr's life. In sharp contrast is the sprinkling of well-dressed planters and merchants in the audience. They're mostly members of the conservative Federalist Party, which has come to the aid of Colonel Burr. Now, since early this morning, Quincy Howe has been talking to members of both groups and found that all of them are more than willing to speak their minds, so strong is the partisan feeling among the people over this trial of Colonel Burr. So now to our CBS studios in Richmond and Quincy Howe.
Well, John, all the Federalists I've talked to seem to think that Justice Marshall will grant the defense motion to stop further testimony. The Democratic Republicans, of course, say he will not. They say that no matter what Marshall thinks himself, he won't dare go against the popular feeling that Burr is guilty. But that's only opinion. Let's look at the facts. The indictment against Colonel Burr charges that he committed treason by assembling an armed force at Blennerhassett's Island in Virginia and taking them down the Mississippi to seize New Orleans. According to the prosecution, this was part of a bigger scheme to take the newly acquired Louisiana Territory away from the United States, to seize Mexico from Spain, and to set up the combined region as an independent country under the rule of Aaron Burr himself. But the government struck before the alleged plan could be put into operation, and Burr was captured while trying to escape into Spanish territory. 2 weeks ago, the prosecution began putting witnesses on the stand in an effort to prove its case. But within a few days, Colonel Burr moved to stop the government from doing this anymore. For 10 days, Justice Marshall listened to debates on the pros and cons of that motion. Then, last Saturday, at the close of debate, he said he would give his ruling when the court resumed sitting today. I've just been informed that Colonel Burr is at the courthouse. He has arrived from the home of Mr. Luther Martin, his counsel, where he's being held in custody for the duration of the trial. Don Hollenbeck is with the colonel, so over to Don Hollenbeck.
We're speaking to you from an anteroom in the Virginia House of Delegates, where Colonel Burr is waiting under guard until the court convenes. He's talking now with a group of ladies and gentlemen who've come here to wish him well at this crucial point in his trial. The colonel has promised to join us at our CBS microphone in a moment. In the group chatting with him, I see Mr. Washington Irving, the popular young New York essayist. We understand he was engaged by a friend of Colonel Burr to write newspaper accounts of the trial. Oh, Colonel Burr has now ended his conversation. He's coming this way. The colonel's a rather short man, slim, walks very erect, probably a carryover from his years of military service during the Revolution. As you probably know, Colonel Burr is a very able lawyer, and he's taken an active part in his own defense. Oh, Colonel Burr, sir, we have Judge Marshall's permission to ask you a few questions, if you consent.
I'm at your disposal, sir.
Well, now, as a lawyer, sir, do you think Judge Marshall will grant your motion and stop the prosecution from presenting any more of its witnesses?
He must. He cannot do otherwise without violating the terms of the Constitution.
How's that, Colonel?
Well, it's quite simple. According to the Constitution, levying war against the United States is treason. It stipulates that conviction of treason shall only occur on the evidence given in open court by two witnesses to the same overt act. Now, mark that. The act must be overt, direct, clear-cut. And there must be two witnesses. Has the prosecution been able to produce two witnesses to testify that I was at Lenape Island when the alleged act of treason was committed? No, they haven't. And they cannot because it's common knowledge that on December 11th I was 200 miles away in Kentucky.
But, Colonel, your men on Blennerhassett's Island...
Has the government been able to prove that they committed treason? Of course not. The prosecution witnesses have offered nothing but hearsay and innuendo.
All right, Colonel, but what about the testimony of Jacob Albright?
What about it, indeed? Mr. Albright, an ignorant laborer, testified that he saw 20 or 30 men bearing arms at Blennerhassett's Island on the night of December 10th. Now, could such a handful of men even dream of undertaking to revolutionize the Western Territories and detach them from the United States?
Well, perhaps not by themselves, sir, but General Eaton in his testimony said you also counted heavily on the assistance of General Wilkinson, the Commander-in-Chief of United States Army Forces in Louisiana Territory.
General Eaton is a discredited scoundrel, and I might add that his military title is purely self-administered. Now, Mr. Hollenbeck, consider the circumstances in which he made his deposition against me. He'd been pressing a claim for $10,000 against the government for several years with no success. But as soon as he agreed to appear against me, the government paid his claim in full.
Well, are you charging that General Eaton's testimony was bribed and perjured?
If the shoe fits, Eaton is welcome to wear it. This whole charge against me is rubbish, vicious rubbish. I'm confident that Justice Marshall will grant my motion and that the case will be quickly turned over to the jury.
And if that should happen, Colonel Burr, do you expect the jury to acquit you?
Well, as to that, I realize I'm not popular. I've been the victim of character assassination, even at the hands of President Jefferson. People are prejudiced. Still, I do not ask the jury to love me. I merely ask that they love and respect the Constitution of the United States. If they do, I shall be acquitted.
Thank you, Colonel Aaron Burr.
Not at all.
This is Don Hollenbeck returning you to John Daly in the courtroom.
Colonel Burr's attorneys, Federalist Party leaders to a man, have just entered the courtroom. There's Mr. Edmund Randolph, a former governor of Virginia. With him are Mr. Charles Lee, Mr. John Wickham, and, of course, the eminent Mr. Luther Martin. Mr. Martin was a member of the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention. He's heavy-set, broad-shouldered, favors a careless manner of dress, but he's known to have few equals in eloquence or knowledge of the law. He and his colleagues are passing this way. Mr. Martin.
Yes?
May we have a word with you, sir?
By all means.
You may recall that we had the pleasure of interviewing you once before during the impeachment proceedings against Justice Chase.
Oh, yes, in Washington. I remember very well.
Well, sir, the government's attorney, Mr. Hay, implied in his arguments that if Justice Marshall rules in favor of your client, Colonel Burr, he may face impeachment proceedings himself.
Mr. Hay's remarks were quite out of order. I'd call it pressure tactics to intimidate the bench.
Well, Mr. Martin, how do you think Justice Marshall will rule?
Well, I'm sure he won't yield to threats. He'll interpret the Constitution as any honest man must interpret it. He must not permit the prosecution to introduce into this country the evil doctrine of constructive treason.
Constructive treason?
Yes, sir. Constructive treason is the European theory of treason by intent and not by action. There's an important difference between these two.
Our Constitution expressly defines that treason should not consist of thoughts, of words, even of conspiracies, but of overt actions. If Mr. Jefferson has his way, that constitutional safeguard against tyranny will be eliminated. He'll stop at nothing in his desire to crucify Colonel Burr, but he will fail.
Well, thank you, Mr. Martin. The chief counsel for the defense is going up the aisle toward his desk at the front of the courtroom as the hour for convening draws closer. While he was speaking, the government's attorneys prosecuting the case against Colonel Burr entered the courtroom, and they are already in their seats. And by the way, I see Ned Calmer is talking with United States Attorney George Hay, who heads the prosecution. Go ahead, Ned Calmer.
I'm not quite clear. Oh, Mr. Hay, could you speak to us now? Colonel Burr has just predicted that Justice Marshall will grant his motion to block any more prosecution witnesses from taking the stand. May we have your comment on that?
You certainly may, sir. Colonel Burr has a way of permitting his wishes to influence his predictions. That tendency has put the colonel out on a limb before. May do so again today.
But what about the argument that Colonel Burr was not at Bunnerhassett's Island and that his men on the island can't be accused of levying war because they never resorted to force?
That argument won't hold up. If Colonel Burr's men didn't use force, it was only because the government acted before they had a chance to do so. And what difference does it make whether Colonel Burr was at Bunnerhassett's Island or not? We have shown that Aaron Burr plotted against our country. And we've shown that he assembled armed men and moved those men toward the execution of that plot. Now, if that isn't treason, what in the name of heaven is?
Well, the defense says that...
I tell you, sir, if the defense has its way, it will be impossible for the government to defend itself against traitors. If Justice Marshall grants the defense motion, every traitor in our country will redouble his plotting without fear of punishment.
One more thing, Mr. Hay. Mr. Martin has charged that your disregard for the question of whether Burr was at Bunnerhassett's Island and whether his men actually had to resort to force amounts to an attempt to introduce the doctrine of constructive treason, that is, treason by intent. He claims that this would mean the end of our civil liberties. Could we have your opinion about that?
How very amusing. Mr. Martin posing as a defender of civil liberties. Did Mr. Martin have any respect for civil liberties when he was Attorney General of the state of Maryland? No, he did not. He persecuted his political opponents without mercy. Sir, I charge Mr. Martin. I charge Mr. Martin with playing politics at the risk of the nation's safety. And I charge him with defending a known murderer, Aaron Burr, the man who killed the leader of Martin's own party, Alexander Hamilton. Pardon me, sir. I see the jury is entering, and I must speak to my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Hay. The United States Attorney has rejoined his staff. As he said, the 12 jurors have entered the courtroom. They're seating themselves in the row of chairs to the right of the judge's bench.
All rise.
Justice Marshall has entered the courtroom. He came in through a door behind the bench. John Daly now has a better view of Judge Marshall than I have, so back to John Daly.
Justice Marshall is walking toward the bench. As you probably know, he is not only the federal judge of this circuit, but is also Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He makes an impressive figure in the black robes of his office. He's a tall man, carries his head a bit to one side, and there's an expression of great seriousness on his face. The decision he is to make today must weigh heavily on him, may well be the most important of his career. That's the clerk of the court. Let's listen.
All persons having business before this circuit court of the United States of America, in and for the Fifth Circuit and District, draw near and ye shall be heard.
Justice Marshall nods to the prosecution and defense lawyers, seats himself, and now the lawyers, spectators, and jurymen on signal all do likewise.
The case of the United States of America versus Aaron Burr will continue.
Bring in the accused.
As the clerk of the court motions toward a door at the side of the chamber, Colonel Aaron Burr appears, walks swiftly toward the prisoner's box, 2 guards beside him. There's some hissing and booing from among the spectators, but Colonel Burr ignores it, shakes hands with his lawyers, seats himself, and now Judge Marshall.
The question now to be decided
has been argued in a manner worthy of its importance. Counsel on each side has been of the utmost aid to the court in forming the opinion it is about to deliver. The indictment charges the prisoner with treason in levying war against the United States and alleges an overt act of levying war. That alleged act must be proved by 2 witnesses. If the act be not proved by 2 witnesses, all other testimony must be irrelevant. Now then, the prosecution has not brought forward any witness to prove the actual presence of the accused at Lenape Island on the date of issue. On the contrary, the fact of his absence is not disputed by counsel for the United States. Consequently, since counsel for the United States has failed to establish the overt act of treason on the part of the accused, it is the deepest conviction of the court that the motion made by the defense must prevail.
Justice Marshall has ruled for the defense. The prosecution will not be permitted to put any more witnesses on the stand. Colonel Burr and his lawyers very naturally are smiling triumphantly. The prosecution or government attorneys, on the other hand, appear to be almost stunned by the judge's decision. United States Attorney Hay is speaking in a low voice with the other members of his staff, and they seem now to be in general agreement as to what to do, and Mr. Hay is on his feet.
Your Honor, in view of this decision by the court, the United States have no alternative but to leave the case to the jury. The United States rests.
Judge Marshall's face is expressionless. He turns now to the defense lawyers, and Mr. Luther Martin, Chief of the Defense, has risen.
Your Honor, the defense rests.
The jury have heard the opinion of the court on the law of the case. They will apply that law to the facts as presented and find a verdict of guilty or not guilty as their own conscience may direct. The jury will now retire for the purpose of coming to a decision.
And the fate of Aaron Burr is now in the hands of the jury. Justice Marshall is leaving the courtroom. Jurors are filing out also. The judge will retire to his chambers, and in all probability, he will not emerge again until the jury is ready with the verdict. The spectators are leaving the court, going outside to get a breath of fresh air, but they're eager to have the court reconvene at any moment and to hear the final decision. Ken Roberts is out there on the steps of this imposing courthouse building, and he can and has been sampling the public's opinion of Judge Marshall's decision, meanwhile taking a sort of informal poll as to what the public think the jury's verdict is going to be. So go ahead, Ken Roberts.
John, this is one of the... John, this scene out here is really something to watch, John. People are milling around all over the square, trampling down the grass, arguing vehemently with each other. Some of them are jubilant, others are red-faced with rage. Hundreds of them were unable to get into the courtroom this morning. They've been waiting here in the broiling sun, and that hasn't helped their tempers any. Most of these people apparently intend to wait out here until the jury's verdict is in. With me, for instance, is a gentleman who says he'll stay here if it takes all night. He wears the fancy dress uniform of a general in the Tennessee militia. He is General Andrew Jackson. General Jackson tells me he was brought here as a government witness because he contracted to build boats for Colonel Burr's expedition. But he was not put on the stand.
Yes, and I'll tell you why they didn't put me on the stand, because I know that Aaron Burr is as innocent of treason as you or I.
Well, General Jackson, do you have proof of Colonel Burr's innocence?
Proof? Why, the colonel told me personally that he intended to lead an army into Mexico. He intended to liberate Mexico from Spain and make it a part of the United States. Now, is that treason? No, Sir Blasted, that's patriotism.
But, General, it's claimed he meant to seize Mexico and Louisiana for himself, even make himself an emperor.
Oh, no, sir, no. Only Mexico, and not for himself, for the United States. I have his word for that. The word of a gentleman and a soldier.
The word of a murderer, the word of a traitor.
Madam, now see here,
You ought to be
madam.
ashamed of yourself. yourself standing up for a scoundrel like Aaron Burr.
Madam, I thank you to mind your own business. I was speaking to this gentleman here.
The whole country knows what Aaron Burr was up to.
Just a moment,
and yet
madam,
you stand
please.
there. But
Please.
this man said that Aaron Burr...
Yes, but let's do this one at a time, madam, please. Now, General Jackson, you think the jury will bring in a verdict of not guilty?
If they don't, they ought to be drawn and quartered and the pieces scattered to the four winds.
Thank you, General Andrew Jackson. Now, madam,
Thank
you were
him for what? For pouring that Federalist poison into your ear?
Madam, I am not a Federalist. I'm as good a Democratic Republican as you are.
Then I say heaven protect us
Madam,
from your
please.
kind of Democratic Republican.
Instead of dragging him into court, President Jefferson should have stuck a medal for Colonel Burr. We frontier
General Jackson,
folk know
General,
that
please.
we'll have to fight.
If you don't
We'll have
mind,
to fight.
sir, you've had your chance. Now, please give this lady her chance to speak. Thank you again, General. Now, madam, would you tell us your name, please?
I'm Mrs. Emily Shepard.
I see. And do you live here in Richmond?
Yes, and a sorry place it is to live these days. Full of rich Federalists hobnobbing with Aaron Burr, sneering at the ordinary people, scorning President Jefferson of the Republic. It's a disgrace the way they've made a hero of that man, giving great dinner parties for him, and him a traitor to his country. Why, Justice Marshall himself attended one of those parties. It's shameful, shameful.
Do you mean that Judge Marshall is prejudiced in favor of Colonel Burr?
He's a Federalist, isn't he? What can you expect of Federalists? I say it's high time they learned their lesson, and they'll learn it when Aaron Burr is hanged by the neck.
Thank you, Mrs. Emily Shepard. Judging from what's being said out here, I'd guess those reactions from Mrs. Shepard and General Jackson just about sum up the two opposing attitudes. Quincy Howe in our CBS studios here in Richmond has been examining the situation. He's ready now with his analysis, so back to CBS Richmond, Quincy Howe reporting.
It must be clear by now that these past 28 days have witnessed something much more than just a trial at law. What's been going on here has been a basic struggle between our two political parties, the Federalists on the one hand and the Democratic Republicans on the other. Ever since President Jefferson, leader of the Democratic Republicans, indicated his desire to see Colonel Burr convicted, the Federalists have made Aaron Burr's cause their cause. Many Democratic Republicans say that the New England Federalists are sympathetic to Burr because they themselves have plotted to withdraw New England from the Union. They charge that Federalists in general have seized on this Burr trial as an opportunity to embarrass the Jefferson administration. Now, it's clear from the jurors' own statements in court that they are predominantly Democratic Republicans, and as such, they must have backed President Jefferson against the Federalists in the struggle over ratifying the Louisiana Purchase 4 years ago. They might therefore be inclined to believe the charge that Burr tried to steal the Louisiana Territory, which would have cut off the Mississippi for American commerce, and that Burr also plotted with England in that very connection. Well, in any case, all this has led to such an intense popular feeling against Burr that for 2 weeks it was just about impossible to assemble an unbiased jury. It was Colonel Burr himself who finally broke the deadlock by declaring he would take his chances even with a jury of manifest Democratic Republican leanings. Now here, by tape recording, is the statement Aaron Burr made to the court on August 15th.
Your Honor, I'm under the necessity of taking men in some degree prejudiced against me, or of having a fourth panel of prospective jurors called. I'm unwilling to submit to the delay of another panel, and so I accept the consequences. I hope the jury will do me justice.
Now, on the basis of all this, is it likely that the jurors will accept Justice Marshall's opinion of the law and acquit Aaron Burr, or will the jury bring back a verdict of guilty? This is Quincy Howe returning you to the courtroom at the Hall of Delegates and John Daly.
The jury returned from their deliberations a few moments ago, is already seated in the box, and Justice Marshall is on the bench. The spectators have reassembled. They're very quiet. They know that this is the moment that they and the entire country have been waiting for. Every seat is full, and the atmosphere of the courtroom is charged with excitement and tension. Judge Marshall is leaning forward right now, whispering to the clerk of the court. As always, there is a slight delay as the scene is set for the dramatic moment of a trial, the handing down of a verdict by the jury. But now the clerk has left the bench, is walking toward the jury box, and in a moment we'll know whether Aaron Burr is to be found guilty of treason and sentenced to hang, or the clerk is speaking.
Have you reached a unanimous verdict?
Aye.
How do you find?
We of the jury say that from the evidence submitted to us under this indictment, Aaron Burr is not proved to have committed treason. We therefore find him not guilty.
Not guilty. The jury has acquitted Aaron Burr. Colonel Burr is standing triumphantly in the prisoner's box, and pandemonium has broken loose among the spectators. Most of them are very obviously bitterly disappointed. However, some friends are rushing up to Colonel Burr and the defense lawyers, congratulating them on their victory. Considering the bitterness that we have seen here in this courtroom, this is sure to be regarded by many people as a triumph for American justice. When a man so widely supposed to be a traitor, in the midst of political rancor, sometimes bordering on hysteria, can be acquitted in a court of law. However, we call your attention to the odd phrasing of the verdict. It seems to indicate that the jurors themselves may still have some reservations about Colonel Burr's innocence. If they do, they have suppressed their own feelings and accepted Judge Marshall's interpretation of the law.
September 1st, 1807. Aaron Burr is acquitted of the charge of treason, and a precedent for the American concept of justice is established.
You have been listening to the trial of Aaron Burr in the series You Are There. The trial of Aaron Burr was written by Michael Sklar, directed by John Dietz, and produced by the CBS documentary unit under the supervision of Werner Michel. Aaron Burr was played by Martin Gable. Charles Webster was Justice John Marshall. Eric Dressler was Andrew Jackson. James Goss, Luther Martin. Paul Mann was U.S. Attorney Hay. Others in the cast included Agnes Young, Guy Sorrell, and Bert Cowlin. Beginning with this broadcast, You Are There will be heard every fourth Sunday at this time. Listen on November 27th, 4 weeks from today, over many of these same stations. Next month,
1830, Baltimore, Maryland. The race between the first American locomotive and a horse-drawn carriage. You are there.
When you keep your appointment with Dr. Christian, you keep an appointment with humor, drama, pathos, and real people living real lives in a typical small American town. Every Wednesday night, Dr. Christian, the kindly small-town physician, uses humor and horse sense as often as medicine to heal the troubles of his friends and neighbors. With stories that the whole family will enjoy, hear Dr. Christian this Wednesday night on most of these same CBS stations. This is CBS, and this fall you'll hear them all on the Columbia Broadcasting System.
This is John Daly in the Salem court of Massachusetts Bay Province. The recess in the witchcraft trial of 71-year-old Rebecca Nourse, which started at 10 o'clock in the morning of this 29th day of June, 1692, is just about over, and the trial should soon resume. As you know, Rebecca Nourse, great-grandmother and mother of 8, whose husband owns a 300-acre farm not far from the Crane River Bridge, went on trial this morning as a witch. The penalty for witchcraft is death. This courthouse on Townhouse Lane is jammed to the rafters.
Salem, Massachusetts, June 1692. CBS is there.
A Salem court tries a woman as a witch. CBS invites you to believe that our microphone is there waiting for the verdict. All things are as they were then, except for one thing.
CBS is there.
This broadcast, the fourth in a special summer series produced and directed for Columbia by Robert Louis Cheon, is based on authentic historical fact and quotation. And now,
Salem, June 29th, 1692, and John Daly.
We'll tell them how this trial is progressing. The tension with which this day opened here in Salem has grown greater, if possible. In this trial, second in the biggest roundup of suspects these colonies have ever seen, two key witnesses for the prosecution this morning testified that the defendant, Rebecca Noss, was responsible for fits, seizures, and the unnatural torment which have been plaguing a dozen or so Salem girls for the last few months. Another woman named by these girls, Bridget Bishop, has already been hanged and waiting in jail at this very moment to be tried by this same court on these same charges of witchcraft are 150 local residents who were seized in their homes in nearby Lynn, Topsfield, Marblehead, Amesbury, Andover, Wells, as well as Salem, and as far off as Boston. This morning, a prosecution witness, the Reverend Mr. Samuel Parris, minister of Salem Village, testified that the alleged unnatural activities of Rebecca Noss against the afflicted children are actually part of a much larger plot against the government. Is that correct, Mr. Parris?
If that plot had not been discovered, the plotters would soon have succeeded in sinking this government.
On the stand this morning, Mr. Parris, you spoke of proof.
They have been holding meetings, sir. They have been holding meetings and plotting to root out the Christian religion from this country.
I see. You said, too, that they were prepared to blow up all the churches and wreck our government.
And set up instead their own diabolism.
So, well, I'm told, sir, that before you came to this church, you were a merchant in the Barbados Isles.
I gave up commerce for the ministry.
You brought back with you some slaves, sir.
2.
Is it true, Mr. Parris, that there has been a dispute going on between you and members of your congregation as to what were the terms of your salary agreed upon 2.5 years ago?
When I accepted the call to this parish 2 years and 7 months ago, my salary was clearly determined.
But there is a dispute, isn't there, as to whether it gives you permanent ownership of the parsonage or merely the use of the ministry and the pasture.
The salary for my services includes full and permanent ownership of the parsonage and surrounding grounds. Those who have disputed it are simply not in possession of the facts.
I see, but is the prisoner's husband, is Francis Noss, among those who have disputed your claim to permanent ownership, Mr. Parris?
Francis Noss is not in possession of the facts.
Just one more question, Mr. Parris. About the committee charged with furnishing you with firewood last November, when you tried to have them brought to law.
The committee had stubbornly and for a long time been derelict in its duty to furnish the parsonage with firewood.
But it was argued then that an extra sum had been added to your annual salary to compensate you for finding your own firewood.
But
Mr. Parris, Rebecca Noss's husband, the husband of the woman against whom you testified this morning, is on the firewood committee, is he not?
Rebecca Noss has been plotting the destruction of our government.
Thank you very much, Reverend Samuel Parris. Also on the stand this morning, we heard Dr. William Griggs, village physician, testify that a number of his patients had been bewitched. Dr. Griggs, you said that you yourself had seen evidence of their unnatural affliction.
I saw the minister's, the Reverend Mr. Parris's own niece, try to fly up the chimney.
You described how she was picked up by an unseen force.
An unseen force hurled her through the room so that she flew from wall to wall. Then she began to show every evidence of starting to fly, stretching up her arms as high as she could and crying, "Wish, wish, wish."
This morning, Dr. Griggs, you testified that the girls were under the baleful influence of an evil eye. Now, speaking as a medical man, what is the explanation of the evil eye?
When a witch turns her evil eye on a subject, an invisible and impalpable fluid darts from the eye of the witch and penetrates the brain of the bewitched. From then on, the witch can do with the bewitched as she pleases.
Thank you, Dr. Griggs. The excitement over the witches brings to a head the anxiety and unrest which has been disturbing these people of Salem. Dissatisfaction with a succession of governors, high taxes, a high cost of living, and lately rumors of war make it easy to understand why the distracted Salemites feel, as one put it to me this morning, that Satan is loose in New England, and why they're not surprised to learn that 150 of their own neighbors and even friends have been plotting with the devil against them and their government. The judges are coming in now. Judges Sewell, Sargent, Winthrop, Richards of Boston, Corwin and Gedney of Salem, and here comes the Deputy Governor, the Honorable William Stoughton, who has been acting as Chief Justice during the trial. This is the sign that the recess is over, the prisoner is about to be brought in, and the trial resumed. The crowd grows quiet. Attorney General Thomas Newton has walked over to say something to Deputy Governor Stoughton.
Here she comes.
Oh, here she comes. Here comes Rebecca Norse, accused witch. She's flanked by George Herrick on the right, another constable on the left. Her husband is standing up. Francis Norse is waving to his wife, trying to get her attention, but the elderly prisoner seems to be either too indifferent or too tired to look up. That was her daughter's voice. The voice you heard was Sarah Norse's, the defendant's 28-year-old daughter. She called out, "Mother," and her mother seems to have heard her. She raises her head. She looks a little bewildered. Judge Stoughton is pounding on the desk for order. The trial's about to start. In the front row, the afflicted girls, Ann Putnam and Abigail Williams, who are here to testify against Rebecca Norse, are staring at her. The marshal helps the prisoner to the platform where she stood this morning. Apparently, Rebecca Norse is still not going to sit. She's going to stand through this session. She's standing about 8 feet from the judges now, facing the judges. Attorney General Newton has opened the trial, and he tells Rebecca Norse, "You are now in the hands of authority."
I adjure you to answer the questions of the court truthfully and not to lie.
He warns her not to lie, and now I'll throw open the microphone on the witness stand and let you hear the proceedings.
Rebecca Norse, why do you hurt these children?
I do not hurt them.
If you are guilty of this fact, do you think you can hide it?
The Lord knows.
Ann Putnam, have you seen this woman hurt you?
Yes, she beat me last night.
Despite the fact that Rebecca Norse was locked in the Salem jail last night, 12-year-old Ann Putnam accuses her of having beaten her in her own home, thereby implying that Rebecca Norse can be in two places at once and is therefore a witch.
Abigail Williams, have you been hurt by this woman?
Yes.
Now, Rebecca Norse, here are two, Ann Putnam, the child, and Abigail Williams, who complain of your hurting them. What do you say to it?
I do not hurt them.
This morning you heard read the confession of one Abigail Hobbs, confessed witch. She named you as the queen of a witch's feast. What do you say to it?
How could she say that? She is one of us.
What do you mean by that?
By what?
What do you mean by one of us?
She is like the rest of us, innocently imprisoned.
Didn't you say you would tell the truth? Who hurts these children now? Look upon them.
May I go to prayer?
We have not sent for you to go to prayer. Why did you stop coming to church when the girls were seized with fits?
It made me ill.
Why didn't you visit them in their affliction the way the other neighbors did?
I was not able to go out of doors because of illness.
What sort of illness?
I suffer from weakness of the stomach, sir.
What did he say to you?
We mustn't believe everything these distracted children say. There is no one whispering in the ear.
You dare to lie before this whole assembly. You are now before authority. I expect the truth. What did the man whisper in your ear?
I ask anyone here to tell me they saw anyone beside me. You can see I am all alone.
Next time to the sacrament, David, please do not
There has been talk among your neighbors, Rebecca Norse, that your illness is of a supernatural character. What do you say to that?
But I've had difficult times, sir. I am the mother of 8 children, and I suffer with the weakness that any woman would, my age and condition.
Do you have any wounds?
Attorney General Newton has asked the defendant perhaps the most dangerous question of all so far. Do you have any wounds? Referring to those marks found on the person of a witch which betray that she is in league with Satan. But Rebecca Norse, being slightly deaf, he has to repeat the question, do you have any wounds? I have none but old age, she answers. 71-year-old Rebecca Norse is beginning to tire. Her white hair, somewhat disheveled, is clinging to her forehead. She's wringing her hands, nervously clasping and... Something strange is happening. 12-year-old Ann Putnam is screaming. She is pinching. She is pinching. And now Abigail Williams is screaming. She is choking me. Both of these girls seem to be having some kind of a spasm. They're writhing on the floor, clutching at their throats and crying that Rebecca Norse is choking them. Deputy Marshal Herrick and another constable have run over, and they're each holding one of the prisoner's hands to keep her from pinching and choking the girls, who are at least 10 feet away from her. They're now manacling her hands behind her back. The turmoil is dying down. The spectators are taking their seats. Attorney General Newton again turns to the prisoner, who seems visibly...
You see, Rebecca Norse, what a great condition these girls are in. Why do you hurt them?
I do not hurt them.
When your hands are freed, the girls are pinched and choked.
May I sit down? I do not feel well.
You are strong enough, Rebecca Norse, to bewitch these girls. You are strong enough to stand at your trial. Do you think these girls suffer voluntarily or involuntarily? What do you say, Rebecca North? Do these girls suffer voluntarily or involuntarily?
No.
The court is not able to hear you.
May my husband come up to wipe me for it, sweat from me for it. My hands are bound.
These girls charge you with hurting them. If you think they suffer involuntarily, then you admit that what they say is true. And if you think they suffer not willingly, then you are calling them murderers. Which do you say, Rebecca North?
I do not mean to call them murderers. I don't know what to make of their conduct.
Answer the question, Rebecca North. Do you think these girls suffer against their will or not?
I do not think they suffer against their will.
Rebecca North is showing extraordinary courage. Old, alone, pitted against men of superior education and legal training with no lawyer to defend her, she nevertheless sticks to her point that the girl's fits are not involuntary. Now Ann Putnam's mother, Mrs. Thomas Putnam, takes the stand.
Tell the court what happened.
One morning, Rebecca North came to me.
What time was it?
It was very early morning. Just as it grew light. She was still in her nightgown. She came to me, and she brought a little red book in her hand.
She tried to make you sign it?
She said if I wouldn't, she would tear my soul out of my body.
What happened then?
Then there appeared to me 6 children in winding sheets. And they called me aunt.
Who were these children?
They told me they were the children of my sister Baker, who lives in Boston. And they said that Rebecca North had murdered her. And they told me to go and tell it to the magistrate, or they would tear me to pieces.
The testimony piling up against Rebecca North has become more serious, if possible. And now another neighbor of the accused, Sarah Pepper, a widow, takes the stand.
Now, without fear, will you tell the court, Sarah Pepper, whether anything ever took place between the prisoner and any member of your family?
Yes, sir. About this time, 3 years ago, my dear husband, Benjamin Pepper, now dead, may the Lord bless his soul, was as well as I ever knew him in my life.
Yes, go on, please.
He was healthy and happy till one Sunday morning, Rebecca North.
The same Rebecca North who now stands charged with witchcraft?
The same Rebecca North who now stands charged with witchcraft.
What did she do?
She came to our house and fell to scolding and railing at him because our pigs had gotten into her fields.
Your fields are close together?
Yes, sir. And we're only supposed to keep half the fence mended. It's up to her to mend the other half. That was the agreement.
What happened then?
Her side of the fence was down and our pigs got through. We told her we'd kept those pigs hobbled, but there wasn't a thing you could say to quiet her down. She railed and scolded, calling on her son Benjamin to go and get a gun and kill the pigs.
How did your husband answer her?
My poor husband never said one word amiss to her. And it was right after that he was taken with a fit.
Was his seizure the same kind as the afflicted girls have been having?
His seizure was the same kind as the afflicted girls have been having.
Did your husband have any seizures after that?
My poor husband was never the same again. The day before he died, he talked very cheerful, but he was seized at midnight, and this fit lasted till the next night. And then he died.
The deputy marshal is leading the weeping widow Pepper back to her seat, and Attorney General Newton turns to confer with the 7 judges behind him. This looks bad for the defendant. So far, all of the testimony... Wait a minute. A young man is coming towards the judge's bench. It's Samuel Norse, the prisoner's son. The sheriff challenges him.
If you have any evidence to present, Samuel Norse, present it at the proper time.
This is the proper time, and I ask leave of the court to present my evidence.
Tell your story.
On the 27th of March, I and my sister's husband, John Tarbell, he's here now, and he'll swear to everything I say.
Tell your story.
John and I went up to Thomas Putnam's to find out why his wife and daughter were making shocking accusations against my mother.
The reason why is no secret. You heard them tell the court.
I wanted them to tell me. At the house, I found Miss Putnam, her daughter Anne, and one of Anne's friends. I asked young Anne how she came to name my mother among the witches. I said, did she mention my mother's name first, or did someone else say it to her?
What point are you trying to make?
When I asked young Anne how she first came to mention my mother's name among the witches, she replied that she had seen the apparition of a pale-faced woman sitting in her grandmother's chair. I said, who was that woman? She said she didn't know her name. I said, who told you to say my mother's name?
Are you saying...
That's when her friend spoke up. Why, Anne, don't you remember? She said it was your mother. That made Miss Putnam very angry. She cried, why, it was not. It was you told her to say Rebecca Norse. Then they turned on each other and they said it was you told her to say the name.
I still don't understand the point you are trying to make, Samuel Norse.
What I'm trying to say is that not one of those who now accuse my mother would admit it was they first named her among the witches.
First all us, they named her.
Attorney General Newton seems to be a little impatient as he motions Samuel Norse to return to his seat. His sister has risen. The Norse family seems to be on the attack now in defense of their mother. Sarah Norse, the defendant's 28-year-old daughter, without being asked, without permission, has come up and is now standing before the bench. Attorney General Newton ignores her. He's conferring with the judges. Rebecca Norse is looking at her daughter. She's smiling, a strange, vague smile. Now Attorney General Newton has turned to Sarah Norse. He's taking her testimony.
I was in the meeting house on the 24th of March, the day the committee first examined my mother. I was there when Miss Bibber...
You are referring to the widow Bibber who lives in Wenham?
That's the one. I was there when she went into a fit.
The court knows that.
I was watching her when she began to scream that my mother was sticking her with pins.
You're adding nothing new to the facts, Sarah Norse. If that is why you have asked for permission to testify...
But I saw Miss Bibber take the pins out of her clothes. I saw her take the pins out of her clothes. That's a lie! I saw Miss Bibber take some pins out of her clothes and hold them between her fingers. Then I saw her clasp her hands around her knees. And that's when she began to scream that my mother was sticking pins into her. That's a lie! You're a liar! You're a liar!
One of the spectators probably sees Mrs. Bibber screaming, that's a lie. She's a liar. Sarah Norse is answering her, shouting, it's the truth, and you know it. The marshal is making her go back to her seat.
Go on down and take your seat. I would like to speak.
Benjamin Putnam is asking to testify.
forward.
The Attorney General is inviting him to come forward, is asking the brother-in-law of Mrs. Thomas Putnam, who testified against Rebecca Norse just a minute ago, to come forward.
I have a paper here, signed by 39 people of Salem and Salem Village. I ask the court's permission to read it.
You may read it.
We, whose name...
Will you read it a little louder?
We, whose names are hereunto subscribed, being desired by Francis Norse to declare what we know concerning his wife's conversation for some time past, can testify to all whom it may concern that we have known her for many years. And according to our observation, her life and conversation were as she claimed it, and we never had any cause or grounds to suspect her of any such thing as she is now accused of. Signed, Benjamin Putnam, Sarah Putnam, Job Swinnerton, Esther Swinnerton, Samuel Abbey, Hepzibah Ray, Daniel
This
Andrew...
is a surprise. 39 of Rebecca Norse's neighbors, including Ann Putnam's own brother-in-law, testified by petition to their belief in Rebecca Norse's innocence. Rebecca Norse seems stunned by this unexpected turn in her favor. The spectators, too, seem visibly impressed by the long list of responsible and respectable names. Mrs. Putnam looks startled. She keeps brushing her hair out of her eyes. Her face is pale. Judge Stoughton is turning to the jury.
Rebecca North! Didn't you bring the devil with you? Didn't you tell me to tempt God and die? How often have you eaten and drunk your own damnation for
That was Mrs. Putnam. She's screaming, how often have you eaten and drunk your own damnation? She's hysterical. She's becoming violent. She's ripping her clothes. Her husband has received the court's permission to take her outside, and he's lifted her bodily. He's carrying out, kicking and screaming out of the courtroom, and has taken her out now. The trial can start again. Rebecca North seems to be on the point of fainting. It doesn't look as if she can keep standing on her feet much longer. Once again, Judge Stoughton... Wait a minute, something else has happened. A woman among the spectators threw her shoe and hit Rebecca North in the face. There's a red streak on Rebecca North's right temple where Mrs. Pope's shoe hit her. Rebecca North looks white and shaken. The courtroom is quieting down. Judge Stoughton turns to the jury. Apparently there's going to be no more testimony. He's going to send out the jury for a verdict right now.
I charge that you, being the judges of the facts, if you find that Rebecca North did bewitch the said girls, Ann Putnam and Abigail Williams, so that they were sore afflicted and tormented, then you must find her guilty of witchcraft under the statute of James I.
The jury has risen now and is filing out of this courtroom to consider the verdict. The judges are leaving too, and Deputy Marshal Herrick is taking Rebecca North from the courtroom. Some of the spectators are leaving for a breath of fresh air. The jury is out of the courtroom now. Of course, there's no possible way of knowing how long they will be. They may return momentarily, and if they do, we will switch back here to the courtroom immediately. Meantime, there are about 150 other suspects, as we told you, who have been rounded up in this drive and who are now in nearby jails waiting to be tried by this same court. My colleagues Harry Marble and Ken Roberts are at this moment in two of those prisons, Boston and Ipswich, with CBS microphones, and we switch you first to Harry Marble in Boston Prison.
This is Harry Marble in Boston Prison. I'm standing in a room about 25 by 35 and 7 feet high. The walls are of stone and the windows are barred. Leaning against the walls and chained to the benches here are about 25 or 30 men who are waiting to be tried for witchcraft. Right beside me, his hands manacled, is Navy Captain John Alden. Captain Alden, what are the specific charges against you?
Witchcraft, I presume.
You have to pay your own room and board while you're in prison, don't you, Captain?
Yes. And should I have the misfortune to be found guilty, my family would have to pay the cost of my execution. And, of course, my property would immediately be confiscated by the authorities. The deputy governor, I imagine.
I am told that some of your fellow prisoners confessed to practicing witchcraft, Captain.
I will tell you how one confessed. A boy of about 18. They had him tied neck and heels until blood flowed from his mouth and nose. He confessed.
One more question, Captain Alden. Are you by any chance related to the John Alden who married Priscilla Mullins?
That was my father, sir. My parents met on the Mayflower coming over from the other side.
Thank you, Captain John Alden. This is Harry Marble in Boston Prison. I now switch you to Ken Roberts in Ipswich Jail.
This is Ken Roberts in Ipswich. The jail here is crowded with women of all ages. Beside me here is the prisoner, Dorcas Good, accused witch. How old are you, Dorcas?
I'm 4 years old.
4-year-old Dorcas Good was arrested the same day as Rebecca North.
I'm 4, going on 5.
Dorcas just corrected her age. She is 4, going on 5. Why are you here, Dorcas?
I want a piece of bread with honey.
Do you know why they put you here, Dorcas?
My name is Dorcas Good, and I'm 4 years old, going on 5.
Chained beside 4-year-old Dorcas here is Mrs. Rebecca Jacobs of Salem town. Why have they put you in prison, Mrs. Jacobs?
They ran in the street. They ran in the street, and I said, look at the children. They are running in the street.
Mrs. Jacobs.
Then the men said, these are your children. They are running after you. Tell them to go back.
Your children saw you arrested, Mrs. Jacobs?
Come home, Mother. Mother, come home. I want my children. I want my children. I want my mother.
Do you get enough to eat here, Mrs. Jacobs?
Children, don't cry. Mother will be home. The nice men are just taking your mother for a walk.
Mrs. Jacobs, have your children been allowed to visit you?
Bloodroot and windflowers, sweet Mary and lilacs, they grow in my garden. When night comes, they close their eyes and go to sleep. I want my children. I want my baby.
I want a slice of bread and honey.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Jacobs, but a message has just been handed to me. The jury trying Rebecca North has just come back into the courtroom. So this is Ken Roberts returning you to John Daly in Salem.
This is John Daly in the Salem courtroom. The jury has come back. The jury charged with the fate of Rebecca North has just returned. The judges are in their places. The prisoner, her hands still manacled, stands facing the bar. The spectators are silent, waiting. The jurymen have taken their seats, all except Thomas Fisk, the foreman. The foreman is standing, and now Judge Stoughton turns to the jury.
Have you reached a verdict?
We have.
What have you found?
We find the defendant not guilty.
Not guilty. The jury has found Rebecca North not guilty. She looks stunned and stands bewildered and confused, pale and shaken. Her husband is fighting his way up to her. 72-year-old Francis North is crying, and his wife, Rebecca North, is now in his arms. Rebecca North, her gray head sunk on his shoulder, is crying for the first time since this trial began. Her sons and daughters are kissing and hugging her. They're all trying to touch her. They're patting her face, her hair, her dress, and they're laughing, and at the same time, tears are streaming down their cheeks. Now Judge Stoughton has left the bench and is talking with Thomas Fisk, the foreman of the jury. George Herrick, the deputy marshal, is pushing his way through to Rebecca North, probably to tell her that he's glad she was acquitted. The deputy marshal is saying something to Rebecca North now, and for some reason or the other, he's taking her by the shoulder. And now the jury is going out again, and Sam North has run over to the deputy governor. He seems to be having a heated argument with Judge Stoughton. I'm going to get over there to find out what's going on. There's something going on. There's a great deal of confusion all around here.
Do this to my mother. I did not impose on the jury. I've merely given them a fact which they had overlooked.
Mr. North, what has happened?
They're making the jury convict my mother. The jury comes back with a verdict of not guilty, and Stoughton sends them out again. They come back and he tells them that they have misinterpreted the facts. They have my mother on the stand, and they tell her Abigail Hobbs said she was a witch. And she says, how can Abigail say that? She is one of us. Now the judge says that when my mother said she's one of us, she admitted she was a witch, too. But he heard my mother say she didn't mean that. She meant Miss Hobbs was just one of the prisoners. Why, what Stoughton's done is tell the jury to hang her.
But why? Why should Judge Stoughton do this?
Because they've got some people in office around here who are scared of being pushed out. There are too many people who don't like them. So they find themselves some scapegoats. They take women like my mother. They say she's a witch. They say they're trying to bewitch our children and sink the government. All they're trying to do is save their own necks, and for that they're going to hang my mother.
Sam North is angry, frenzied. He seems to be absolutely sure the jury will change its verdict. I've never seen anything like this happen in a courtroom before, and it's hard to believe. But we'll see. The jury is coming back already. They've only been out a short while. With Tom Fisk leading them, they're coming back into the jury box. Their faces are grave. Judge Stoughton is banging his gavel for order and has turned now to jury foreman Thomas Fisk.
Have you reached a verdict?
We have.
What is your verdict?
We find Rebecca North guilty as charged.
Mother!
Rebecca North has been found guilty. What Sam North feared has happened. Everything he said was apparently true. And if this is contempt of this court, let it be so. A woman adjudged innocent by a jury of her peers, by almost precise direction of a presiding judge, has been found guilty and now must pay the supreme penalty.
Salem, June 29, 1692. Rebecca North is guilty, and the witch hunt goes on.
You have been listening to CBS Is There, the fourth in a special summer series of broadcasts of famous events. Next week,
July 29, 1588, the English Channel. Sir Francis Drake defeats the Spanish Armada. CBS Is There.
CBS Is There is produced and directed for Columbia by Robert Louis Cheon. The Salem witch trial was written by Sylvia Berger. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Good evening. This is John Daly standing in front of Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. This is indeed a red-letter night in the history of Ford's Theater, April 14, 1865. Because tonight, President Abraham Lincoln and his party will attend a special charity performance of the celebrated English comedy, Our American Cousin. Inside the theater, the curtain has already gone up. Outside, here in front of the theater, the crowd of curious spectators
Time,
stand around.
April
awaiting the arrival of
14th,
the President's carriage.
1865. Place, Washington, D.C. You are there.
Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. CBS takes you back to one of the great dramas in our nation's history. All things are as they were then, except for one thing.
You are there.
You Are There is based on authentic historical fact and quotation.
And now, Washington, April 14th, 1865, and John Daly.
The damp and misty weather in Washington tonight has not dampened the ardor of the crowds, who for 4 long days now have been wildly celebrating the surrender of General Lee to General Grant. The people here are in high spirits, gathered around Ford's Theater, which is a 3-story, red stone building, windows and entrances in gray. Tultival's Saloon is on the right, Ferguson's Saloon is on the left, and both of them are jammed. The windows and doors of the houses along both sides of the street are open. People are hanging out of them for a look at the president. Although the curtain has gone up on the play, some members of the cast who are not on stage at the moment stand around in their costumes for a look at Mr. Lincoln. There's John Diet and Mrs. Helen Muzzy. There's young Miss Jane Gowdy and John Wilkes Booth, the handsome, dashing Shakespearean favorite. He is not in the performance tonight, by the way. I think I see over there. Oh, yes, there's Mr. Harry Ford, one of the 3 brothers who manage this theater. Now, if I can just get through to him, excuse me, please. Oh, let me push through here. I'm sorry, but watch the cable. Oh, Mr. Ford. Mr. Ford.
Yes, sir?
Say, Mr. Ford, this is CBS. You have a great crowd here tonight.
Yes, the theater is sold out.
And have you raised your prices for tonight?
Tonight is a charity benefit. The orchestra is $1, the dress circle and the parquet 75 cents, and the family circle is 25 cents.
I see. Well, this is the second time President Lincoln has attended your theater, isn't it, Mr. Ford?
Yes, and tonight he's going to sit in the same box. And I brought in that old rocker he likes.
Oh, thanks very much, Mr. Ford.
Not at all, anytime.
Thanks a lot. I think I see John F. Parker, the president's personal guard, arriving on foot. Evidently, he's come ahead of the president to be on hand when Mr. Lincoln and his party arrive. Now, if I can get through to him, excuse me, please. Let me through. I'm sorry, but watch the cable. Mr. Parker! Oh, Mr. Parker. Say, Mr. Parker, this is CBS. Has the president's carriage left the White House? Is he on his way over here?
Yes, he and Mrs. Lincoln left about 10 minutes ago to pick up Major Rathbone and Miss Harris.
Well, aren't General Grant and Mrs. Grant in the party?
No, they were supposed to come, but General Grant left on the evening train for Burlington.
Oh, that's too bad. We kind of hoped we'd see the general as well as Mr. Lincoln. Say, by the way, who is Miss Harris?
Well, that's Miss Clara Harris, daughter of the senator from the state of Maine.
Oh, yes, of course. And Major Rathbone is an attaché at the War Department.
That's right.
Excuse me, right. Yes, the president's carriage is just coming down 10th Street now. It has crossed F Street. It's going to pull up right here at the carriage platform. The president is smiling, bowing, doffing his high black silk hat to the crowd, and the band that's been waiting here for this moment is picking up its instruments and getting ready to play. Burns, the coachman, is slowing up the horses now. The carriage is stopping at the platform. Forbes, the footman, has jumped down to assist the party as they get out. Mrs. Lincoln and Miss Harris are getting out, and now the president, followed by Major Rathbone. The band wants to play a tune. They're asking the president what it is he wants to hear, but it'll probably be Yankee Doodle, Marching Through Georgia, or Rally Round the Flag. The president just said something to the band leader, but in all of this racket, I just can't hear what he's saying. Oh, do you hear that? It's Dixie! Mr. Lincoln has asked the Union band to play the Confederate song, and they've responded with a will. Above all this din, the crowd understands the meaning of Mr. Lincoln's request. It's his policy of forgiveness and reconciliation with the South, of harmony for the nation. The war is over. The United States of America is now one great nation. And Mr. Ford is leading the way into the theater, up the gray stone steps. Mr. Lincoln's just a few feet away. Oh, Mr. President, this is CBS, sir. May I ask you a question?
Fire away.
Well, as you know, Mr. President, the newspapers and a part of the clergy have been opposed to your practice of attending the theater. And I'm sure that...
Yes, I know. Some think I do wrong to go to the opera and the theater, but it rests me. I love to be alone and get to be with the people. I want to get this burden off, to change the current of my thoughts. A hearty laugh relaxes me, and I seem better able after it to bear my cross.
I understand, sir.
Good night.
Good night, Mr. Lincoln, and thank you. Now the presidential party has entered the door. A CBS microphone is inside the theater at the rear of the orchestra. President Lincoln will pass it in just a minute, and so enter the theater and Don Holliday.
The audience doesn't yet know the president has arrived. The ladies might be interested, by the way, to know that Mrs. Lincoln is wearing a white silk crinoline under her cloak. I'm trying to see here. It's an elaborate headdress of flowers and combs over her curls. There's silken mittens and a shawl held together at her throat with a brooch. The president, well, he seems to have lost a lot of weight, but, oh, he looks happy tonight, very happy. And now the party is turning right and going upstairs to the boxes. The president should be there in just a minute. The audience has caught sight of the president. The play stops. The orchestra strikes up Hail to the Chief. And now CBS has a booth directly across the theater from the president's box. And I see that John Daly's reached it, so over to John Daly.
We're in the CBS box now. I can see the president entering his box across the theater. We have Columbia microphones on the stage and in the audience. I'm going to open them both and let you hear what's going on. The president is in his box now. The audience is standing. Mr. Lincoln is acknowledging the welcome. Beaming, he nods his head and waves to the jam-packed crowd. And now, motioning towards the stage and the interrupted play, Mr. Lincoln sits down. The ovation continues, but following the president's lead, slowly, almost by sections, the audience resumes its seats and the play will resume in just a moment. Our American Cousin by Tom Taylor, by the way, is an eccentric comedy, as many of you probably know. It's a popular favorite, been performed at least 1,000 times. The play revolves around a typical, drawling Yankee in England who lights his cigar with an old will, burning the document to ashes, and thereby throwing a fortune into the hands of an English cousin. And now, the CBS microphones on the stage will pick up some of the dialogue. Lord Dundreary, a silly, foppish Englishman, is being teased by Florence the heroine, played by the star Miss Laura Keene.
Yes, but a lonely one.
What sort of night had she?
Oh, a very refreshing one. Thanks to the draft I've described for her.
What? Have you been prescribing for Georgina, Lord Dundreary?
Oh, yes, quite. You see, I gave her a draught that cured the effect of the draught. And that draught was a draught that didn't pay the doctor's bill. Didn't that draught?
Good gracious, what a number of drafts. You almost had a game of drafts. What's the matter?
That was a joke, that was.
Anyone can see the draft has been suspended.
Miss Keene has very neatly injected a bit of the National Peace Celebration into the play. With Lord Dundreary making so much of the word draft, Miss Keene threw in the line, anyone can see the draft has been suspended. And everyone in the audience knows that General Grant suspended the military draft this very morning. That was quite keen of Miss Keene, if I may be permitted the pun. Well, the president enjoyed that joke, too. He's smiling broadly. The play continues, and we'll take you again to the stage presently, but on this gala night, the audience is as interested in the presidential party as they are in the play. Although, because of the angle at which the box is set, they can only see Miss Harris and Major Rathbone. The presidential party is occupying boxes numbers 7 and 8, the partition between them having been removed to make it roomier. The boxes are decorated with 4 flags. The president is seated in that old rocker that Mr. Ford told us about before. There's a chair at the door of the box in which John Parker, the guard, is sitting. He can't see the stage, but he can hear the actors' voices. Oh, evidently John Parker wants to see and hear, for he's now getting up from his chair and taking a seat in the dress circle with a clear view of the stage. Mrs. Lincoln is seated on the president's right, and from time to time she leans over on his arm and they exchange a few words. The president appears completely relaxed, and perhaps his mind is on other things. Perhaps he is looking at his wife and thinking, we've had a hard time since we came to Washington, but the war is over, and with God's blessing, we may hope for 4 years of peace and happiness, and then we'll go back to Illinois and pass the rest of our lives in quiet. But then it's more likely that Mr. Lincoln is just plain enjoying himself tonight, for the president is listening with obvious pleasure to Mrs. Mount Chessington, an English lady in the cast, and Harry Hawke, who is playing Asa Trenchard, the American cousin. Now, once again, our microphones on the stage pick up the play.
Well, Mr. Trenchard, you are not used to the manners of good society, and that alone will excuse the impertinence of which you have been guilty.
Mrs. Mount Chessington flounces off an aristocratic dudgeon, leaving a drawling Yankee alone on the stage.
Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You sock-dologizing old man trap.
What was that? It sounded like a shot, but there's no shot in the play. One moment. Oh, Major Rathbone is struggling with a man in Mr. Lincoln's box. A man who is stabbing wildly at him with a knife. Major Rathbone's giving ground before that knife, and now his attacker has leapt over the railing. He's on the stage. The man has risen. He's running across the stage. He's gone through the stage exit directly under this box. That was Major Rathbone who shouted out, "Stop that man." Someone in the audience has leapt over the footlights after him. Something has happened. Something is terribly wrong. This is not part of the play. Blue smoke is curling from President Lincoln's box. I can't see him because Miss Harris and the Major and Mrs. Lincoln are surrounding him. President Lincoln has been shot. That was Mrs. Lincoln who just cried out, "He has shot Mr. Lincoln." The man did it. The man who ran across the stage. The man who grappled with the Major. John Hollenbeck is out there in the theater, already fighting his way up to the president's box. So go ahead, Hollenbeck.
This is John Hollenbeck. I guess we're on the air here. I'm trying to get through this crowd to find out what's going on. I don't know what's happened. I don't know what's happened.
What is it? What's happened? Tell me what's happened.
Someone has shot Mr. Lincoln.
It was Booth.
Who? One member of the stranded crowd has identified Mr. Lincoln's attacker. He says it was Booth, the actor, John Wilkes Booth. We'll try to get someone who was in or near Mr. Lincoln's box. Let me through, please. Let me through. Watch the cable, please. Watch it just a minute. Thank you very much. The whole theater's in an uproar. Everyone's standing, running up and down the aisles. Women are moaning and fainting. Miss Keene is handing water up to Mr. Lincoln's box. Watch that cable, please. Men are lifting up an army sergeant and army surgeon up on their shoulders. The stage is swarming with people. We'll get through to Mr. Lincoln's box now in just a second.
Stand back! Back!
Soldiers blocking the door with bayonets poised. That soldier's crying. Tears are streaming from his eyes. There's an officer. Lieutenant Crawford, sir. Lieutenant Crawford, what happened?
Well, I was sitting in the seat. There's the door to Mr. Lincoln's box. I saw Booth go in.
Just walk in, but where were the guards?
Well, I don't know. I heard a shot, and I saw Booth leap over the railing. His spare caught in the flag as he jumped. It ripped the flag and broke his fall, and maybe broke his leg.
Oh, are you sure it was Booth?
I swear it.
What did you do? Did you get into the president's box?
Well, I rushed it, but the door was barred. Booth had barred it when he went in from the inside, and we broke through. Major Rathbone let the doctors through. Only the doctors. Look, have they caught Booth? Did he get away?
Just a minute, Lieutenant. The door is opening. 4 soldiers are carrying Mr. Lincoln out.
Are you the president?
Where are you taking him? Are you taking him to the White House?
No, not to the White House.
Doctor, is the wound mortal to Mr. Lincoln live?
Guards! The
President Lincoln is being carried out of the theater now.
Healing.
I've just been informed that John Daly's out in the street again, so go ahead, Daly.
Two more soldiers have joined the 4 who are carrying the president out here into 10th Street. The street is jammed with people who have heard the news. It's a wild, awed, panic-stricken, swirling mob. The guards are having a hard time breaking through the mob, crossing the street. The long roll you hear is the alert being sounded. There's a light in a house, and the door is open. A man stands at the door with a candle, calling to the group carrying Mr. Lincoln. They're taking the president in there. The number is 4-5.
453 10th Street. Anybody know who lives in that house?
Petersen! It's the Petersen House!
It's the only house available. The President's White House Guard is thundering into the street. Perhaps you can hear the ring of their horses' hoofs on the cobblestone. They're flashing their sabers and clearing the street. President Lincoln has been shot. President Lincoln has been shot. There's been so much excitement. Only now the full horror of what has just happened at Ford's Theater is beginning to dawn. We will stay here in front of the Petersen House and bring you immediately any reports on Mr. Lincoln's condition. But we have just been informed that something has happened elsewhere in Washington that we don't know of here on the scene, and so we return you now to our studios.
And I'll give you the bulletins as fast as they come in, Quincy, as soon as we get it back from Daly down there on the street, right?
How much time have I got, though? How long am I on?
Wait a minute. Go ahead.
You're on the air. This is Quincy Howe. John Daly has just announced that an attempt has been made on the life of Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. Secretary of State Seward, I should say, has also... just a second. Here's the bulletin. Secretary of State Seward has been attacked. A man entered the Seward house on Lafayette Square in Washington tonight. He overpowered all resistance, gained entrance to the Secretary's bedroom, and slashed at Mr. Seward with a knife. It's not known whether the attacker was John Wilkes Booth or an accomplice, or whether the two attacks were connected. Now, here's Ned Calmer with more bulletins.
All Washington's in a state of panic this terrible night of April 14th, 1865. There are wild rumors that the entire cabinet has been murdered, that General Grant has been assassinated, that the war is not yet over. There's no evidence as yet that these other wild rumors are true. I repeat, the other rumors are not true so far as is known. Secretary of War Stanton has arrived at the house on 10th Street where Mr. Lincoln has been taken. He's in complete charge of the situation up to now. Now again, Quincy Howe.
John Wilkes Booth has escaped. He left Ford's Theater by a rear door, leapt on a horse that was waiting for him, and dashed off into the darkness. Someone from the audience chased him, just missed him, a matter of inches. Booth left Washington by the Navy Yard Bridge, where a sentry challenged him, and he gave his real name, John Wilkes Booth.
The following is the fiend's description. Age, 26, lithe and sinewy of body, having probably a broken leg, intense of speech and behavior. Height, 5 feet 8, weight, 160 pounds. Hair black, eyes black, heavy dark eyebrows, wears a large seal ring on little finger, when talking moves his head forward, looks down. That is John Wilkes Booth. Rewards totaling $100,000 have been offered for his capture. Armed pursuit groups are after him already.
Booth must have had help. He just couldn't have committed this crime by himself or without lots of preparation. But who slashed Secretary Seward? Who crossed the Navy Yard Bridge a few moments after Booth? Why was it that Booth tried to see Vice President Johnson this afternoon and then left his calling card when he failed? Who cut the telegraph wires out of Washington and why? Where was the president's guard, John F. Parker? How could Booth have possibly gained entrance to the president's box without being challenged? These are some of the questions that the tragedy has raised here in this bewildered capital. How deep do the roots of this plot go? Does the trail perhaps lead right to persons highly placed up in the government? A note has just been handed me. John Daly, in front of the Petersen House, has news of President Lincoln's condition. So we take you now to the Petersen House.
This is John Daly in front of the Petersen House, where President Lincoln was carried after he was shot in Ford's Theater across the street. The president is sinking swiftly. He has not regained consciousness since Booth sent a single bullet fired at close range into the area behind the president's ear. The surgeons are discussing now the question of removing that bullet. Mrs. Lincoln is in there at the bedside, so is the president's son, Captain Robert Lincoln. Tad, the president's younger son, is at the White House. He has been assured that his father will live, but this was told the lad only to quiet him. Major Rathbone was slashed about the arm and shoulder by Booth and fainted from a loss of blood. He has been taken home. In addition to Secretary of War Stanton, most of the cabinet members have arrived, and here comes the Secretary of the Navy, Mr. Gideon Wells. Mr. Wells, this is CBS. We know how great your grief is at this moment, sir, but there are so many questions still to be answered about this frightful tragedy. Will you help us? Who is this amazing madman, John Wilkes Booth?
This lunatic, this unspeakable Judas, is a known secessionist who did not have the courage to don the uniform of his cause.
But
What possible motive, sir, do you think he could have had in committing this hideous crime?
Only a mind deranged could have given birth to such an act. It may be that he thought to kindle again the dead spark of rebellion. If so, he is as great a fool as he is a villain. The war is over. The Union will stand. Booth has done the Confederate cause more harm than he can imagine.
What about the South, sir? What will the South think of Booth's act?
I do not know the mind of the South, but I predict that when the men who fought with Lee, in uniform, under a flag, and according to a clean code, hear of this day, they will shrink with horror from this vile deed. Assassination is not an American tradition. It never struck in this country until tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I know that as Mr. Lincoln's friend and Secretary of the Navy, you want to go in and see him. A note has just been handed me. It says, "Oh, this is sad and tragic news. The President's pulse is still falling. His breathing becomes more labored." That's all the note says. As this night of unutterable gloom and sadness wears on, stern resolve melts. Great men weep openly. There's scarcely a dry eye in this crowd here. The door to the Petersen House is opening once again, and Mr. John Hay, President Lincoln's private secretary, is coming out. Mr. Hay, over this way, please.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hay, you've been close to Mr. Lincoln. Did he have any fear that he might be struck down before his great work was finished?
Our beloved president constantly received threatening letters, which he filed away in an envelope. In March last month, there were 80 letters in the envelope. It was marked assassination.
You mean letters from cranks and that sort?
Yes. In 1860 in Springfield, Mr. Lincoln saw a double image of himself in a mirror. One face held the glow of life and breath. The other shone ghostly pale, white, portent of a safe passage through the first term, and death before the end of the second.
That was 5 years ago, then, that he had this omen?
Yes. But only last week, the president dreamed that he was walking through the White House amid the sound of great sobbing. In the East Room, he came upon a coffin guarded by soldiers, surrounded by a weeping throng. The president asked, "Who is dead in the White House?" And the soldier replied, "The president. He was killed by an assassin."
Well, how did Mr. Lincoln feel about these presentiments?
Perhaps he answered that question this afternoon. He was walking across the White House grounds, and he passed some profane, drunken men. Mr. Lincoln remarked to his guard, "Crook, do you know, I believe there are men who want to take my life, and I have no doubt they will do it. I know no one could do it and escape alive. But if it is to be done, it is impossible to prevent it."
Thank you, Mr. Hay. The tragic news of the attack on President Lincoln has spread around the world. And now CBS takes you to important European capitals. First, to Buckingham Palace in London, England, and the voice of Her Britannic Majesty, Queen Victoria.
I speak to Mrs. Lincoln. No one can better appreciate than I, who am myself utterly broken-hearted by the loss of my own beloved husband, what your suffering must be. And I earnestly pray that you may be supported by him, to whom alone the sorely stricken can look for comfort.
And now to the French capital.
This is Paris. I am a French student speaking for thousands of us in the Latin Quarter. President Lincoln is a fellow citizen. There are no longer any countries shut up in narrow frontiers. Our country is everywhere, where there are neither masters nor slaves, where people live in liberty or fight for it,
the attempted assassination of President Lincoln. The message reads, in far places over the earth, on every continent, the name of Lincoln will be worshipped, and the personality of Lincoln will become a world folk legend. Many hardships and much experience brought him to the realization that the greatest human achievement is love. The greatness of Napoleon, Caesar, or Washington is moonlight by the sun of Lincoln. His example is universal and will last thousands of years. Lincoln is humanity. We return you now to the United States.
This is John Daly in front of the Petersen home on 10th Street. It is past 7 o'clock in the morning, April 15, 1865. President Lincoln was shot last night at 10:15. Doctors say there is no hope. The long vigil will soon be over. Here outside the Petersen House, a cold rain is falling. The sky is dully gray. The early morning mist is like a shroud. The hearts of men and women are overflowing with grief. Some are kneeling, some lifting their voices in the singing of spirituals. We are told that Mrs. Lincoln is not in the room with the President. She has made her last farewell and is seated in a back parlor. Captain Robert, the President's son, is leaning on Secretary Stanton's arm. He has borne himself well. Only twice has he given way to his overwhelming grief. The Reverend Dr. Gurley has spoken a prayer. For Abraham Lincoln, there will be black borders on the newspapers today, anguished sermons on Resurrection Sunday tomorrow in a resting place. There will be the end of the mortal, but the beginning of the immortal. For Abraham Lincoln will live on in the union he has saved, in the freedom he has given, in the dreams he has dreamed, in the vision he has seen, the vision under God of a new birth of freedom, of government of the people, by the people, for the people. Secretary of War Stanton is coming out of the Petersen House now. He pauses in the doorway, and the crowd, looking at his grief-stricken face, is suddenly silent. Mr. Stanton, how is Mr. Lincoln?
Now, he belongs to the ages.
The dread thing that we have awaited is come. President Lincoln is dead. The victim of Booth's vicious...
Washington, April 14, 1865. Abraham Lincoln is assassinated at Ford's Theater.
Before we go to our show today, we'd like to invite you to visit our new nostalgia guide. Go to poddango.oldmuse.com. That's poddango.oldmuse.com and click nostalgia. The Old Muse Guide is going back in time, where the oldies are still young. This show is being brought to you by Old Muse.
You're listening to another premier old-time radio program at poddango.com, and also a proud member of the Blueberry community. Another Humphrey Camardella production.
This is Don Hollenbeck at the War Department in Washington. The Secretary of War has just released the following statement this 26th of April, 1865, and I quote it. The War Department has received an unconfirmed report that John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of President Lincoln, is in the vicinity of Fort Conway, Virginia. Lieutenant Baker and Colonel Conger, two of the ablest agents of the United States Detective Bureau, have been rushed to Port Conway with a detachment of cavalry, signed Edwin M. Stanton, unquote, and end of statement. Port Conway is about 50 miles directly south of the nation's capital in Confederate territory. It's a small town on the north bank of the Rappahannock
April 26, 1865.
Port Conway has now
Wanted, dead or alive, John Wilkes Booth.
The most tragic manhunt in the history of the United States approaches its grim climax. CBS takes you back 84 years. The Civil War has ended. President Lincoln has been assassinated. North and South alike, shocked and appalled, wait for the capture of the man who killed him. Wait for the end of a bitter calamity. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. When CBS is there,
you are there.
You are there. Produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon, is based on authentic historical fact and quotation. And now,
Washington. A corridor in the War Department, and Don Hollenbeck.
Today, it may see the capture of the well-known actor who only 12 days ago stole into a box at Ford's Theater here in Washington, fired a ball into the head of President Lincoln, and escaped. John Daly and Ned Calmer are in the area of Port Conway. They've been covering the manhunt with a CBS mobile unit, and we expect to hear from them momentarily. There have been charges that the federal government has been lax in its efforts to capture Booth. Charges that Lincoln's assassination is part of a conspiracy that reaches high into the government. In the face of those charges, Secretary Stanton and the entire War Department are exerting their utmost efforts to end this manhunt, and today may see the break they've been waiting for. Quincy Howe has had a chance to weigh the possibilities inherent in the report that John Wilkes Booth is in Port Conway, so here is Quincy Howe.
Let me emphasize first that we have no confirmation yet for the report that John Wilkes Booth is in Port Conway, Virginia. During the past 12 days, we've had rumors that Booth was in Pennsylvania, that he was on board ship going to Europe, that he was in Maryland, in Canada, in Mexico, in fact, practically everywhere on the North American continent. But all these rumors, when nailed down, proved to be false, even fantastic. If, however, this report proves true, then the question arises, can Lieutenant Baker and Colonel Conger get to Port Conway in time to catch Booth? Never forget this. Booth is not standing still. He's desperate. He's on the move. The farther south he goes, the safer he becomes. Even suppose Baker and Conger do reach Port Conway before Booth gets out. Will they be able to capture him? Remember, they're in Confederate territory. Will a hostile population reveal Booth's whereabouts? And finally, how will these two detectives from the north stack up against the Confederate guerrillas? Although General Lee's army surrendered some days ago, many Confederate batteries have not yet stopped fighting. Mosby's brigade, for instance. Just a minute. John Daly and Ned Calmer are already in Port Conway, Virginia. Go ahead, Port Conway.
This is John Daly. John Wilkes Booth is in this vicinity. He was here in Port Conway yesterday afternoon, may still be here now. Lieutenant Baker, the detective in charge of this searching party, told me that much a moment ago. Our CBS mobile unit is at the dock of the Port Conway ferry, and Lieutenant Baker is inside the ferryman's shack questioning him. Ned Calmer has been given permission to go inside, and the moment anything develops, he'll come out and tell us. To piece together the story of what happened when the cavalryman got here, I've asked one of these young cavalrymen to talk with us. His name is Tom Williams. He's a sergeant. His home is in Yonkers, New York. Tom, you fellows rode into town about an hour ago. What happened when you got here?
Well, as soon as we got in town, Lieutenant Baker and Colonel Conger started asking everybody we passed if they'd seen Booth anywheres around here. Nobody said they did. I don't know whether they were lying or not. But they just kept on stopping and asking people. And finally, down the road a ways, we stopped an old colored fella, and Lieutenant Baker showed him some pictures of Booth and the other fella, Harold, was supposed to be with him. And
you mean Davy Harold, the stable boy who helped Booth escape from Washington?
Yeah, Harold, that's him. And this old colored fella said he'd seen him and Booth here in Port Conway yesterday. He said Booth stopped and asked him if there was a ferry across the river, and he told him how to find it. Well, when we heard that, we rode up here to the ferry on the double.
Well, Tom, what cavalry regiment is this that you're with?
We're a detachment from the 16th New York.
Did you volunteer for this mission?
No, we were detailed.
Any particular reason?
I guess because we're sharpshooters.
Oh, I see. Then are your orders to shoot Booth on sight?
No, we'll shoot if we have to, but our orders are to try to take him alive.
Do you think you're going to get him, Tom?
Sure, we'll get him. Nobody can do what he did and get away with it.
Well, Tom, if you fellas do capture Booth, do you think you'll get part of that $100,000 reward?
I don't know about that. The only thing is we got to get him, that's all.
All right, thank you, Tom.
Sure.
There's still no word as to what is happening inside that shack where they're questioning the man who runs the ferry. Here beside me now is another man here in Port Conway. He's Mr. Harry Murdoch. Mr. Murdoch, you're not a Virginian. You don't live here in Port Conway, do you?
Oh, no, I'm a Yankee from Chicago.
How do you happen to be here in Port Conway?
Well, I just happened to be in the vicinity, and I heard the report that Booth was supposed to be around here, so I came to scout around.
What do you think? Will they find Booth here?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know. I have a hunch he's not around here. This whole thing is just another wild rumor.
Oh?
Yes, I've been trying to tell Lieutenant Baker that, but he won't pay any attention to me.
Well, what do you do, Mr. Murdoch? Your occupation?
I'm a private detective, Murdoch Bureau of Investigation.
I see.
286 Wabash Avenue, Chicago.
Yes, well, the government has complained that you private detectives have been giving them false clues and wrong leads to deliberately throw them off Booth's trail.
Oh, that's not true. Oh, there may be one or two unscrupulous operators in the field, so it's a case of the innocent being condemned with the guilty.
Well, I don't suppose, Mr. Murdoch, that with $100,000 reward at stake, you'd mind getting Booth first, would you?
Why, sure, that's only natural. But I'm trying to do everything I can to help the government. I'm sincere about this. That's why I've been trying to tell Lieutenant Baker that he won't find Booth in this neck of the woods.
Well, Mr. Murdoch, where do you think Booth is hiding?
There's no doubt about it. He's over in Lower Maryland. He could hide in that swampland for years, and they'd never find him.
Well, if you think Booth is in Maryland, what are you doing here?
Oh, as a matter of fact, I'm on my way to Maryland. I'm just passing through.
I see.
I saw the cavalry ride in, and I don't want them to lose time here when they could be somewhere else.
Yes.
See, I'm a very sincere...
Excuse me, Mr. Murdoch. Excuse me, Mr. Murdoch. Excuse me. They're coming out of the Ferryman's shack. One or two of the soldiers have just come out. And here come Baker and Conger. They have the ferryman with them. Baker has his revolver jammed into the ferryman's back. Lieutenant Doherty has called in the sentries. He's ordered the men to get ready to move on. Here's Dick Calmer.
Wilkes Booth is not here in Port Conway. He's somewhere across the river. He's heading south toward a town called Bowling Green. The ferryman here, his name is Rollins, took Booth and Harold across the river late yesterday afternoon. The ferryman said that two Confederate soldiers crossed with Booth and Harold, and he said he heard the actor boast to the soldiers that he had assassinated President Lincoln. The ferryman also revealed that Booth must have hurt his leg. He's hobbling on a homemade crutch. His leg is wrapped in an old muddy bandage. Also, Booth has shaved off his mustache. Lieutenant Baker got this information from the ferryman at the point of a gun. And now the cavalrymen are going to cross the river. They're getting their horses aboard the ferry boat. They're going after Booth in the direction of Bowling Green, and John Daly and I are going with them. So now back to Don Hollenbeck in Washington.
And so the manhunt goes on. Lieutenant Baker has definitely picked up Booth's trail now, but Booth is 24 hours ahead of the cavalry. And the question is whether Booth is in Bowling Green now, and if he is, why? There's perhaps one person in the country who might know the answer to those questions. Doug Edwards is with him in New York, so over to Doug Edwards.
I'm in the home of the distinguished actor Mr. Edwin Booth here in East 19th Street, New York. Mr. Edwin Booth is a brother of the hunted John Wilkes Booth. Mr. Booth, before any questions are put to you, is there anything you'd like to say?
Mr. Edwards, when a nation is overwhelmed with sorrow by a great public calamity, the mention of personal grief would, under ordinary circumstances, be an intrusion. But under those by which I am surrounded, I hope that a word from me will not be so regarded. It has pleased God to lay at the door of my afflicted family the blood of our deservedly popular president. Crushed to earth by this dreadful event, I am sensible that other mourners are in the land. To them, one and all, go forth our deep, unutterable sympathy, our abhorrence and detestation of this most foul and atrocious crime.
Mr. Booth, do you know of any special reason why your brother should go to Bowling Green?
I don't know, Mr. Edwards. John was very popular wherever he played in the South. He had many friends there. But I know of no reason for him to go to Bowling Green, except the hope that some of his Confederate friends might offer him sanctuary.
Mr. Booth, would you tell us something about your brother? Many of us have seen him in the theater, but what is he like off the stage?
John was a wild, scatterbrained sort of boy, quite impulsive and theatrical. John is vain, self-conscious, too handsome for his own good, hot-tempered. Yet I've known him to be kind, gentle, full of fun, and I was happy that he was my brother. He was always his mother's darling, and this has crushed her heart and spirit.
Mr. Booth, do you have any idea why your brother killed President Lincoln?
He was insane. Insane on the subject of Lincoln. John's sympathies were always with the South, and he blamed Lincoln for all the South's troubles. I recall the day I told him I had voted for Lincoln. He flew into an insane rage and screamed at me that Lincoln wanted to be king of America. I imagine that the news of Lee's surrender drove his mind beyond the limits of reason.
Mr. Booth, somewhere in Virginia, at this very moment, they may be capturing your brother. Have you any comment to make?
I am sure that God will not permit him to go unpunished. He is my brother, but it is far better that he be dead than prolong this shame and humiliation by a public trial.
Thank you, Mr. Booth.
There is something I would like to add, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Booth, say anything you like.
I would like to say, for my mother and sister and my two remaining brothers and myself, that we pray that our loyalty as citizens will be judged by the record of the past. For our present position, we are not responsible. For the future, I shall carry a heavy heart, an oppressed memory, and a wounded name. Dreadful burdens. To a too welcome grave.
Thank you, Mr. Edwin Booth. You mentioned that there are other mourners in the land. Some of them, at this moment, are in Little Falls, New York, waiting for the lonesome train, the train carrying the late President Lincoln to his last resting place in Springfield, Illinois. Ken Roberts has been on that train since it began its sad journey. We take you to him now aboard the lonesome train at Little Falls, New York.
The lonesome train is on a siding a few hundred yards up the track from the depot here at Little Falls, New York. It stopped a moment ago to take on water. Soldiers are standing at attention alongside of each car, and on the ground, in the gloom, are a handful of people, men and women. This lonesome train has passed through many of the great cities and heard the eulogies of high dignitaries, but here, behind these sad faces, are the farmers, the shopkeepers, the little people of whom Lincoln himself was one. They're standing here silently, their eyes running the length of this dimly lit six-car train, always pausing at the third car, which they know holds the casket of their beloved late president. There's the train bell warning that we'll be moving in a minute. Now the soldiers of the honor guard are climbing back up with the cars, and this funeral train is about to continue its lonesome journey westward. Someone has begun to sing.
time of the Republic. Now others are joining in. Let's listen. So this is Ken Roberts switching you to the CBS mobile unit in Virginia.
This is Ned Chalmer. Lieutenant Baker and the cavalry detachment rode into Bowling Green 20 minutes ago. They found out that one of the Confederate soldiers who came across the Fort Conway ferry with Booth is here at the town hotel now. The soldier's name is Willie Jett. Booth and Harold may be with him. We're outside the hotel now waiting. John Daly is inside with Lieutenant Baker. The cavalry have the hotel completely surrounded, and now some of the townsfolk of Bowling Green have wandered up here to the hotel to see what's going on. Most of them have just put on a coat or a pair of pants over their nightcoats. Here's John Daly coming out again. I'll turn the microphone over to him.
Booth is not here. He may be at a place called Garrett's Farm, a few miles up the road, the farm we passed on the way down here to Bowling Green. Lieutenant Baker got that information out of Willie Jett, who is here at the hotel. Jett said he left Booth and Davy Harold at Garrett's Farm last night. Lieutenant Baker has placed Jett under arrest. He's being taken along to point out the Garrett Farm. We're going there now, so back to Don Hollenbeck in Washington.
It begins to appear that Booth is getting help from some Southerners, and the big question now is the attitude of the entire South. How far will it go to help Booth escape? There's one man who might speak for the South. He's the former president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. Mr. Davis is in the custody of federal troops in Irwinsville, Georgia, but he's consented to make a statement. So we switch you now to Irwinsville, Georgia, and CBS correspondent Arthur Hannes.
Mr. Davis, what is the South's feeling about the assassination of President Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth?
I would like to say, have it fully understood, that the South does not, nor will it ever condone this cowardly, villainous act of John Wilkes Booth. I'll give you my assurance that the assassination of Lincoln was not plotted, nor given implement or comfort by any member of the Confederacy. History will prove that it was a conspiracy of certain congressmen to dispose of Abraham Lincoln and place a man of their choice in his place. All decent and honorable people in the southern states are shocked by his murder. Booth is no hero to us. He will be no martyr to the Confederacy. He will receive no welcome among the gentlemen and women of the South.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson Davis. John Daly and Ned Chalmer have reached Garrett's Farm, so we switch you to our mobile unit somewhere near Bowling Green, Virginia.
This is John Daly. The cavalrymen have surrounded the barn here at Garrett's Farm. It's a small barn, only about 20 by 30 feet. Booth and Davy Harold are almost certainly in there. They were locked in by the young Garrett boys who were afraid they might steal their horses. When the cavalry came up, they roused the Garrett family and quickly found out that the two men Willie Jett had brought to the farm were still here. Lieutenant Baker has ordered young Garrett to open the barn door. Now Lieutenant Baker is speaking.
Inside the barn! Come out! Do you hear? Come out! Give yourselves up, or we'll set fire to the place and burn you out. Who are you? And what do you want?
That was a voice from inside the barn, a man's voice calling out, "Who are you and what do you want?" It may have been Booth's voice, if he is inside.
Taken by my trade. Who are you? Makes no difference who we are. We have 50 armed men here. You have no chance to escape.
is opening now, slowly. I can't see anyone yet. Yes, now someone is stepping out. Two soldiers have grabbed him. They're bringing him up here to Lieutenant Baker. He's just a boy. Can't be more than 19. He seems to be giggling strangely and fumbling. Colonel Conger, who is it? Is it Harold?
It's Harold, all right. Who's probably still in the barn?
Is Booth in the barn there with you?
Yes. But I didn't do nothing. Honest, I always liked Mr. Lincoln's jokes. Honest, I swear I didn't do nothing.
Take him over there by the house. If he moves, shoot. Move! Move!
As you can hear, Baker is calling into the barn again, and for the first time he has addressed Booth by name.
We know you're in there. Come out and surrender. This is a hard situation. I have played you. Give me a chance. Take your men 20 yards away, and I'll come out and fight your whole time. We didn't come here to fight. We came to take you prisoner. Come out and give yourself up. Give me time. Time to think it over. I'll give you 1 minute. Starting now.
Baker has just turned to confer with Colonel Conger. They're evidently going to wait out the minute, all right. Ned Calmer is over on the other side of the barn. Ned, have you anything to report?
Just this, John. A little while ago, I talked with Mrs. Garrett and her 2 daughters back at the house, and they told me they didn't know it was Booth who was here. They said, in fact, that when the 2 men came here yesterday with Willie Jett, they gave the false names of Boyd and Herrick. They told the Garretts they were Confederate soldiers on their way home from a Yankee prison camp. And now back to you, John.
I can see by my watch that there are about 25 seconds to go now. As yet, there is no sign from the barn as to whether or not Booth is going to surrender. There's no sound at all. He hasn't much time to decide. Just about 15 seconds left, and if he doesn't come out, Lieutenant Baker is going to set fire to the barn, and of course, in that case, John Wilkes Booth will have an even more terrible choice: surrender or burn to death. There's Booth. Taken alive, and now on orders from Lieutenant Baker, the preparations are being made to set the barn on fire and to burn Booth out. Soon he must come to a decision. I can see now that the soldiers are beginning to carry straw and brush around to the other side of the barn where Ned Calmer is. So go ahead, Calmer.
They're piling the straw at the side and rear of the barn out here, John. The plan is evidently to set the barn ablaze at the back, and that would drive Booth out through the front door. They're piling up the straw, all right, piling it up high. Now they're lighting handfuls of it, pushing it in through the cracks of the barn. Evidently more straw inside. One of the soldiers has just thrown a torch into this dry brush. It blazes up quickly. And now I can see a red glow inside the barn. It's getting brighter in there as the fire starts to take hold. Yes, I can see Booth in there. I can see him clearly through the cracks. I'm only a few yards away from where he is. The fire is lighting up the whole inside of the barn, almost like day. Yes, I can see Booth standing there, leaning on his crutch, his rifle in his hand, and now he's looking back at the flames behind him. He's limping up toward the door. I think he's coming out. Go ahead, John Daly.
The door is opening. Yes, it is opening. And John Wilkes Booth is now standing there defiantly, silhouetted against a background of flame. But now he's gone behind the door just a step. I can't see him. There's a shot. A shot.
Booth has fallen to the floor of the barn. Maybe he shot himself. He said he'd never be taken alive. Baker and Conger have just rushed into the barn, and the barn is an inferno. It's going up quick. The dry brush has sent the dry wood afire, and flames are climbing up into the sky, but they're carrying Booth out now, taking him a little ways up from the barn. Hey, let me through here. Stand down! God won't let me through. A man is blocking my way. Booth is lying on the ground about 15 feet away. He's not dead, but he seems to be in agonizing pain. Blood is running down the back and side of his head. Baker and Conger are bending over him. His lips are moving. He's having difficulty breathing. And now Lieutenant Baker has gotten up. He's coming over this way. Lieutenant Baker! Hey, Lieutenant Baker! How bad is Booth? He's dying. We can't save him. Joe! Get the guard over here. Lieutenant, I saw his lips move. What did he say? He said, "Tell my mother I died for my country." He was shot in the head, wasn't he? Yes, behind the ear. And almost the identical spot he shot Lincoln. But was he shot by one of your men, or did he shoot himself? I don't know. That's what I'm going to try to find out now. All right, Joe. Wait a minute. Lieutenant. Are you certain that it's really Booth? Of course it's Booth. Harold said Booth was in the barn with them. Besides, I've identified him positively. You just heard Lieutenant Baker say, without qualification of any kind, that the dying man is John Wilkes Booth. No one around here seems to be very happy. There's no anger, no spirit of revenge. There just seems to be a sense of a grim job that had to be done.
April 26, 1865. John Wilkes Booth, the man who shot Lincoln, is captured and dies.
You have been listening to The Capture of John Wilkes Booth, another broadcast in the series You Are There, produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon. The Capture of John Wilkes Booth is written by J. Franklin Jones. Edwin Booth was played by Richard Waring, John Wilkes Booth by Stott Scotsworth, and the cast included John Sylvester, Raymond Edward Johnson, Charles Webster, Matt Crowley, Guy Sorrell, James Dobson, and others. Next week,
January 7th, 49 B.C., Caesar at the Rubicon. You are there.
Tonight, the Hit Parade on Parade comes marching to CBS to take over the Jack Benny spot for the summer. The Hit Parade on Parade brings you specially modernized versions of the highlights of the Hit Parade's outstanding programs of the past. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
This is Harry Marble, CBS, London, July 29th, 1588. Somewhere in the English Channel at this moment, under cover of darkness, Sir Francis Drake and the English fleet stand face to face with the Spanish Armada. The decisive battle between Elizabeth of England and Philip of Spain, the battle which will decide the fate of Europe, the fate of the world for 1,000 years, is about to be fought. Before another day is done, we will know whether or not the sun will rise again.
July 29th, 1588. CBS is there.
Sir Francis Drake faces the Spanish Armada. Alone, her fleet at bay in the English Channel, Britain girds to meet invasion. CBS asks you to imagine that our microphones are there sharing one of England's finest hours. All things are as they were then, except for one thing.
CBS is there.
This broadcast, the fifth of a special summer series produced and directed for Columbia by Robert Louis Cheon, is based on authentic historical fact and quotation. And now,
London, July 29th, 1588, and Harry Marble.
This is a night England will never forget. This is a night during which no one has slept. All hearts, all minds, all eyes wait for the dawn. Because when the sun first streaks the English Channel with light, the two mightiest fleets the world has ever known will engage in the greatest sea battle of all time. This epic battle will be the climax of action which has been continuous in the English Channel for 9 days, ever since the sails of Spain loomed out of the sea off the beaches of Britain. A cloak of naval security has been flung over this 9-day action in the Channel by the English Admiralty. We know little of what has happened. We will know nothing more until dawn. But here beside me now is Sir Walter Raleigh, Commissioner of Cornwall, Commander of Plymouth, advisor to the Queen, and her emissary to the New World, America. Sir Walter, we know that you are about to leave to join the fleet for the morning's action. We also know that you speak for the Admiralty and can give us information without violating censorship. Will you, sir, give us a picture of what has happened up to now in this solemn moment of England's history?
I would say, sir, in all frankness, that we have succeeded to this moment in evading the Castilians.
You mean, Sir Walter, that Drake is refusing action?
I'm not refusing. Shall we say simply postponing? You may depend upon the Admiral to engage in his own good time.
Well, is it true, sir, that the Spanish fleet outnumbers Her Majesty's ships?
Well, that, sir, is restricted information.
But we have conflicting estimates, Sir Walter. Some reports put the Spanish fleet at 90 to England's 22. Others say the Armada has 130 to Drake's 90. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, let us simply say that Philip of Spain has considerably more tonnage, but that we have considerably more speed.
Well, isn't it also true, Sir Walter Raleigh, that the Spanish Armada is really a floating army?
Well, the Spanish galleons literally swarm with thousands of fully armed and armored soldiers. Once their ships have grappled with ours, it is their intention to board us and overcome our crews at close quarters.
But Drake's strategy is to avoid this, isn't it? To keep his distance, to seize every advantage of wind, and to smash the Armada with his guns. Is that correct?
Well, that is, shall we say, a rather interesting assumption. It is not correct, however, to refer to Drake's strategy. Howard of Effingham is Lord High Admiral of the English fleet. Sir Francis is his first operation lieutenant.
But enemy information would seem to indicate, Sir Walter, that the Spanish Prince of Parma is waiting at Dunkirk with a fleet of flat-bottomed barges and some 30,000 infantry and cavalry.
Well, that information has come to our attention also.
Well, if Drake cannot contain the Armada, the Spanish fleet will then proceed to Dunkirk, won't it? Pick up the barges and their troops and then attempt an invasion of the beaches of Britain?
I would prefer, if I may, to speak at some length to that point.
By all means, Sir Walter.
Philip, to be sure, believes that because he's taken Africa, Sicily, France, Flanders, and now sits astride the stricken and bleeding continent of Europe like a colossus, he will soon be setting his daughter on the throne of England. He fancies himself carrying from the new world's virgin soil the seeds I planted there in Virginia. But the Spanish sun, I fear, is conducive to hallucinations. The beaches of Britain, sir, have not been invaded since William the Conqueror. And Drake must not, will not fail. And should he, by some foul circumstance, fail, should this blessed isle be defiled by Spanish boots, our last ramparts will be the bodies of our men. We shall fight them everywhere. And in the end, we shall throw them back into the sea. Britons, sir, were not born to be slaves.
Thank you, Sir Walter Raleigh. Here in our CBS studios in London, this critical morning of July 29th, 1588, there is still no news of action in the English Channel between Sir Francis Drake and the Spanish Armada. The news blackout imposed by the Lords of the Admiralty continues. But there is no blackout on faith in England tonight. Everywhere in England tonight, from John O'Groats to Land's End, from Eddystone to Berwick Bounds, from Lynn to Milford Bay, the church bells are ringing as Britons everywhere turn to God in this, their hour of supreme trial. For the sound of the church bells of the ancient walled town in Canterbury, for the service there, now in progress, we take you to Canterbury Cathedral and Jackson Beck.
This is Jackson Beck in Canterbury Cathedral. Here in this magnificent Gothic structure, shrine of Thomas a Becket and center of the new Protestant church, the people of Canterbury are waiting for the Archbishop's invocation. This is an unforgettable sight. From the balcony where I stand, I can view a sea of heads bowed in silent prayer. The great waxen tapers throw their eerie, flickering yellow light over the supplicants and send weird, dancing shadows high into the vaulted ceilings of this old, hallowed edifice. If you were with me now, watching this spectacle, you'd feel as I do, that here is the spiritual soul and heart and strength of Britain in this solemn hour. The bells have stopped ringing now. A figure almost lost in the immensity of this space steps into the pulpit and faces the worshippers. It's the Archbishop of Canterbury. His face is set, sober and stern, and tonight he reads from no text.
Oh, merciful God,
the Archbishop speaks.
In this our hour of travail, we turn to Thee for deliverance. We of England have sought to worship Thee in our own way, and according to our own conscience, as free men should, as Thou hast given us the right. But there are those who in their pride and lust for earthly power would chain and fetter us. We did not wish to sound the trumpet of war. We did not wish to take up the sword. But having the issue thrust upon us, and treasuring freedom to worship Thee more than life itself, we rise to meet the hosts of the invader. We know that Thou wilt hearken to our prayers, O merciful God. We know that under Thy benediction and guidance, the enemy will be vanquished, and that we shall continue to worship Thee in Thy sacred house. Amen.
Archbishop of Canterbury has concluded his invocation. His words strike the keynote of England's stake of religious liberty in this war with Spain. The service here in Canterbury Cathedral continues with the singing of the Canterbury tune from S.T.'s Psalter. This is Jackson Beck in Canterbury, returning you to Harry Marble at CBS London.
This is Harry Marble. Still no word from the Channel. But England knows that her ships are ready for anything that will come. And in a shipyard now, somewhere in the British Isles, is a man who can tell us about them. He is Master Shipbuilder Andrew McTavish. And our CBS correspondent, Ernest Chappell, is standing by to interview him. Come in, Ernest Chappell.
This is Ernest Chappell. Standing beside me in this shipyard somewhere in England is Master Shipbuilder McTavish.
Aye, but I'm not a man for words. I build ships.
So I'm told, Mr. McTavish. You had a hand in building Drake's flagship, the Revenge, didn't you?
Aye. I had a wee hand in it. I helped put down her keel and set her beam, and I shaved her masts and hammered her planks, and I had to fling it to the spars and rigging. Here are the calluses on my hands to prove it. But I wouldn't have you think that I did it all alone. Nay, man, those other good lads here in the yard had a bit of her, too.
Well, what does the Revenge look like, Mr. McTavish? Can you describe her?
Well, I'll give you what information the census will allow. And like all the ships of the line, the Revenge is painted green and white, the colours of the House of Tudor. And she has the royal arms blazoned on her stern, and gilded British lions carved on her bow. The hungry lions this morning, hungry for Spanish meat.
And how do you think she'll stand up to the Spanish men of war, Mr. McTavish?
She'll dance. A bunny heel and fling around them. Now, you mark my word, though. And so the triumph and the Ark Royal and the Swift Shore and the Victory and all the rest of Drake's beauties. They're faster and surer and swifter than the floating Spanish castles with their poop decks high out of the water. They're no ships for slaves, but for free men. And we, the men who built them, say this to you. Have no fear. They're no failing when this morning.
Thank you, Master Shipbuilder Andrew McTavish. This is Ernest Chappell returning you to Harry Marble in CBS London.
This is Harry Marble. Still no news from the English Channel. 4 million Britons in British homes are waiting for news, but none waits more anxiously than a Welsh mother in the village of Nantiglow, Wales. We take you now to Nantiglow and Michael Fitzmaurice.
This is Michael Fitzmaurice in the home of widow Agnes Montgomery in Nantiglow. Nantiglow is a remote inland town in Monmouth Borough, far away from any city. And widow Agnes Montgomery's house is a humble one, with whitewashed walls, hard earthen floor, and thatched roof. How many sons do you have, widow Montgomery?
3 I had, and now but 1. This night he serves with Drake.
And the other 2 boys?
They were Bert and Hal. They too sailed with Sir Francis in bygone years.
What happened to Bert and Hal?
From Plymouth Sound, Bert sailed with Drake and good ship Pasha at Whitsuntide. He has never come back. He was found dead on the plaza at Nombre de Dios. A Spanish knife was through his heart, but his hands were clasped about a Spanish throat.
And Hal?
Hal fought, same as Bert, for Drake. He was taken of tropic fever at Dominica, aboard the Elizabeth Bonaventure. And so now is left to me only my last, my Alfred, who this day stands with Drake on the Revenge. Would I myself could take a pike or pull rope, but I am an old woman and weak, and I have naught to give, except my sons and my tears. And those I give.
I hope Alfred comes back to you, widow Montgomery.
God willing, let it be so. But if it be or not, he will not be found wanting when the time is come. He is a brave lad, and he sails and fights for a brave captain.
Thank you, widow Agnes Montgomery. All England shares your faith in Admiral Drake. And in the Green Mermaid Tavern in Plymouth right now is a man who can tell us more about him. This is Michael Fitzmaurice in Nantiglow, Wales, switching you to the port of Plymouth, and Frank Gallop.
This is Frank Gallop in the Green Mermaid Tavern, Plymouth. The Green Mermaid is a typical English waterfront tavern, a pleasant and friendly place with its oak panels and deep bays, and the cavernous fireplace on which the great wood fire always burns. Here there is the smell of mellow ale and the salty sound of seaman's talk. And here, Sitting across a rough-hewn table from me is an old sailor, Boatswain George Spry, late of Her Majesty's Navy. You say you sailed with Drake, Boatswain Spry?
I sailed the Spanish Main with him and through the Indies and to the New World of America. I fought the Spaniard with him at Calais de Lima and sacked Valparaiso with him till our ship was ballasted with all the doubloons in Castile. And were it not for the fever which took my leg, by God's grace, I'd be in the Channel with him tonight.
Well, then, Boatswain, it follows that you know the Admiral well. What can you tell us about him?
The Admiral has a nose for the wind and a heart like a rock and the hate of a Spaniard.
Well, Boatswain, I understand that you were here in Plymouth when the Armada was sighted and Sir Francis Drake was first told about it.
I was standing on Plymouth Hoe when the news came in. The Admiral was playing at bowls on the green.
Sir Francis Drake was bowling, eh?
Aye, he and the other captains, Frobisher, Hawkins, Howard, and Sir Walter Raleigh, too. They were here for a council of war and having a bit of fun playing this match of bowls as pretty as you please when the news of the Spanish sail off the Lizard come in.
What did the admirals do?
Why, Frobisher and Hawkins and Howard and Raleigh, they were all for hurrying down to the water, but not the Admiral. No, not Drake.
What did Drake do?
Oh, steady does it, says he, calm and cool like. Let's finish the game. There's plenty of time to win the match and beat the Spaniards, too.
And, did they finish the match?
Aye, they aimed their last bowls, the winning cast was made, and then they went aboard and prepared for action with their hearts as light and their nerves as firm as they had been on the whole bowling green.
Well, thank you, Boatswain Spry. This is an anecdote to inspire all England this anxious morning. And this is Frank Gallup in Plymouth, returning you to CBS in London.
This is Harry Marble in London. We have had a report from our CBS observer on the cliffs of Dover overlooking the English Channel. He reports a dull red glow somewhere in the direction of the two fleets. It is impossible to tell what this glow means. It may be an action. We don't know. On the other hand, it may be without significance. We repeat, our CBS observer on the cliffs of Dover has reported a dull red glow on the English Channel somewhere in the direction of the fleets of Spain and England. But there is no official indication that... Just a moment. I have been advised that you have been hearing another voice conflicting with mine.
Yes.
That is the Spanish radio. Radio Spain intruding on our shortwave transmission. This intrusion comes from the powerful shortwave transmitter at Barcelona, with regular enemy propaganda broadcasts directed at the British Isles. The voice you hear is that of the British traitor in the service of Spain, Sir William Penn. Fortunately, we can cut out this interruption in a moment, but while we're shifting our shortwave transmission frequencies, you may be interested in hearing what Sir William has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Marble. I can now announce with complete accuracy that the Revenge, flagship of the English fleet, is on fire in the English Channel. The battered remnants of Lord Effingham's much-vaunted naval squadrons are fleeing northward in cowardly flight. The intolerable affronts which the seamen of England have offered Spain for 30 years are at an end. The capture of Philip's treasure ships, the raiding of his colonies, the open assistance to his rebels are finished. Britons, lay down your arms. Do not resist. In your very midst we have many friends. Yes, friends, Englishmen who will welcome us with open arms. Surrender and renounce heresy, and Philip II in his kingly mercy will be disposed to treat you with charity. If you insist upon reckless, mad intransigence, his regal patience will be exhausted. Your queen will be publicly beheaded. Shiploads of scourgers will be sent to scour your backs. All adults will be either killed or enslaved. Thousands of Spanish wet nurses will arrive to suckle your orphaned infants. That is the mean...
This is Harry Marble, CBS, London. We have now succeeded in clearing up the Spanish interruption. The British Admiralty has asked us to declare unequivocally that there is absolutely no confirmation to the report which Sir William Stanley, the British traitor, just gave you. The report is just another clever enemy propaganda trick by the Spanish to cause confusion and dismay in the ranks of England's defenders. As far as we here in CBS London are concerned, there is still no news of any action whatsoever in the English Channel. And now, after this unexpected delay, CBS, with royal permission and in cooperation with the British Broadcasting Corporation, takes you to a military camp somewhere in England where Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, on this fateful morning of July 29th, 1588, is about to address her people over a national hookup of the BBC. The next voice you hear will be that of Bud Collyer, our CBS correspondent on the scene. Go ahead, Bud Collyer.
This is Bud Collier. I'm standing on the balcony of a castle, which is the headquarters of this rallying point of the British Home Guard. The Queen is expected momentarily. A flourish of trumpets will announce her appearance. She will come out on this balcony and speak to all England via the BBC microphones, but the great crowd below will also hear her voice through loudspeakers spread around the grounds. On those grounds now are thousands of the Queen's men in cassocks of pale blue, Kentish and Yorkshire broadcloth, and buckskin jerkins and canvas doublets, their helmets glinting in the light of the sun. It's the Queen, Queen Bess Gloriana. She's just come out on the balcony. The Lord of the Castle is with her, also her Secretary of State, Lord Walsingham. The crowd has seen her. They're cheering. Listen to that ovation. The trumpets are sounding again. The Queen is holding up her hand. She's ready to speak. The crowd is quieting down. The Queen is a woman of 55. She wears armor. She's stately and calm in this solemn hour. Ladies and gentlemen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of England.
My loving people, I have always so behaved myself that under God I have placed my chiefest strength and safeguard in the loyal hearts and goodwill of my subjects. And therefore I am come amongst you, as you see, being resolved in the midst and heat of battle to live and die amongst you all, to lay down for my God, my kingdom, and my people, my honor and my blood, even in the dust. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England, too. And think it foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm, to which, rather than any dishonor shall grow by me, I myself will take up arms. I myself will be your general. And with your loyal obedience and your valor in the field, we shall shortly have a famous victory over these enemies of my God, of my kingdom, and of my people.
The Queen is raising her hand to still the crowd. Again she speaks.
And now I have news for you. News which I myself have just received. My Lords Effingham and Drake have undertaken an action in the English Channel. The battle is begun. The issue rests with God.
The Queen has just announced that an action has begun. This is Harry Marble in CBS London. We have interrupted Bud Collier because, as you heard the Queen announce, there is action in the Channel. There is action in the Channel. The British Admiralty has given us permission to call in our CBS correspondents, John Daly aboard the Revenge and Ken Roberts on the deck of the Ark Royal. We switch you first to John Daly, somewhere in the Channel.
This is John Daly on the foredeck of Sir Francis Drake's flagship, the Revenge, just north of Calais off Gravelines, France. The English admirals have sprung a surprise with which they hope to cook the Armada's goose. They've launched 8 fire ships, have set 8 ships of the line of flame and are racing them in with the wind and the tide directly into the heart of where they believe the Spanish Armada to be riding at anchor. This is an airy sight, 8 flaming masses reddening the gray dawn, which is just beginning to break, huge moving bonfires over the angry waters of the English Channel. None of the ships in the fleet can see the Armada. We're tacking back and forth, waiting for some sign that will send us into action. The Revenge is second in line. The Ark Royal, Lord Effingham's flagship, is ahead of us. Behind us are Hawkins and Frobisher. We don't know whether the fire ships will strike the Armada or not. The Channel tides are tricky. The wind may change. It's a desperate gamble. But the English admirals, already outnumbered by the Spaniards, have sacrificed, thrown away, written off as total losses, 8 men of war now heading for flaming destruction. The Armada is presumed to be anchored to windward of the British fleet. For at dusk yesterday, both fleets were at anchor, and it was not believed that there would be any action until dawn. But Drake, Effingham, Frobisher, Hawkins, these 4 leaders of Her Majesty's squadrons, have suddenly thrown this flaming challenge, this gauge, right at the feet of the Spaniards. The question is, what is happening to the enemy Armada?
We ought to know soon. It's getting lighter now, and the first rays of the sun are streaking the horizon. However, I can't see the Armada yet. All I can see are the 8 bonfires bearing down upon the enemy ships. But it's time something happened. And perhaps Ken Roberts aboard Lord Effingham's flagship, the Ark Royal, ahead of us and closer to the Spanish, can see more. Let's find out. Go ahead, Ken Roberts. Go ahead, Ken.
This is Ken Roberts aboard the Ark Royal at the head of the English line. I'm beginning to get a clear picture from here. The 8 flaming ships have plunged into the heart of the Armada. The English guessed its position correctly. Their desperate gamble is working, although none of the 5 ships actually touch the Armada. There's confusion among the Spanish ships. Incredible confusion. They're cutting their cables. They're letting go their anchors into the sea. The ships without cable or anchor are at the mercy of the tide. The great fleet is being swept out to sea, galleon crashing into galleon through a tangle of riding cables. And here we go after them. The Ark Royal, the ship I'm on. Effingham, Lord High Admiral of the British fleet, is showing the way with his squadron. And behind us in hot pursuit come Drake, Hawkins, and Frobisher at the head of their squadrons, racing in a single battle line behind us. There's the Revenge, the Nonpareil, the Hope, the Swifter, the Aid. That trumpet call you hear comes from the San Joaquin, flagship of the Duke of Sidonia. He's trying to rally the Spanish galleons. He's trying desperately to stop their flight, to bring them back in formation into that powerful battering ram of a horn crescent which the Spanish favor. You've got to give the Spaniards credit. They're trying to recover from their surprise. They're trying to rally. They're game. They're turning. They're going to stand and fight. But we're sailing head on. We'll be within gunshot in a few... No, we're turning. We're turning aside. Lord Effingham is dropping out to... Yes, there's a crippled Spanish galleon damaged in the fight of the Armada. It's drifting this way. Effingham is diverting his attention from the main objective. He can't resist the fate of the crippled Spanish galleon. But Drake and the Revenge behind us. Drake is going straight on. He's practically taken command. Hawkins and Frobisher are following him. From now on, the main action is with Drake. Drake! It's all Drake! Back to John Daly.
This is John Daly aboard the Revenge, and the hour for which Sir Francis Drake was born has come. We're moving straight in for the Armada, barely 100 yards away. The Spanish are firing on us, and their shot is screaming across our decks. They scored a hit, and another. They're doing damage. The wounded are screaming with pain. The men are calling for the ship's surgeon. They're trying to clear away the splendid rigging. We're still boring in, but our guns are still silent. We haven't opened fire yet, but the Revenge is stopping, turning broadside, showing her port guns to the Armada. The 60-pounders, the 30s, the 18s, the 9s. You'll hear all of them in a moment. Our gunners are ready in its point-blank range. We're out of range, but behind us, the ships of Drake's squadron following our lead are pouring broadside after broadside into the San Martin, the San Sebastian, the San Matthias, and Maria de la Rosa. Now comes Hawkins and the Victory leading his squadron. Then Frobisher and the Triumph followed by his squadron. Guns flaming, enveloped in smoke. It's a shambles. The English fleet has suffered some hits, but the Spaniards have been raked and blasted. The smoke is clearing, and what a sight! The water is beginning to clog with broken masts, wreckage, spars, the bodies of the dead. Men are in the water swimming for their lives. I can see 3, 4, 5, 6 Spanish galleons listing and sinking, and there are more, many more. The Spanish ships that are still afloat have turned tail. The Armada is running, this time for good. Here comes the Admiral. He's just come down from the quarterdeck. Admiral Drake! Admiral Drake! Are you going after them, sir? Are you going after them?
Hey! The Spaniard is running, and if he pauses, he'll be swept to leeward and scuttle off Dunkirk. We'll rake them fore and aft and forward again and again. We'll lay our helms to his dragging sterns and sink them, everyone. It'll be a long time before the Duke of Sidonia sees his orange trees at Samari Port. Hey, you men!
Admiral, what of the Prince of Parma, Sir Francis? What of the Spanish invasion boats waiting at Dunkirk?
By the grace of God and the good Queen's best, my lad, England will not be invaded this day. Nor ever.
You've heard Sir Francis Drake himself say that England has broken the Spanish Armada, that the danger of invasion is over. The Admiral is moving about his men, talking to the wounded, comforting them.
July 29th, 1588. Sir Francis Drake defeats the Spanish Armada, and England lives on.
You have been listening to CBS Is There, the 5th in a special summer series of broadcasts of famous events. Next week,
March 6, 1836, the defense of the Alamo. CBS Is There.
CBS Is There is produced and directed for Columbia by Robert Ewart Sheon. Tonight's broadcast was written by Max Ehrlich. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
of Representatives in Washington, D.C. On this 17th day of February, 1801, the members of the House are about to try again to elect a President of the United States. Soon they will take the 36th ballot and hope this time to break the 6-day deadlock between Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Jefferson is still one state short of the required 9-state majority, and unless he's elected on this 36th ballot, the events of the past few days indicate that violence and bloodshed will descend on this infant capital. The 16 tellers appointed by the Speaker of the House will poll their states. Then they will drop the votes in the 2 ballot boxes provided by the Sergeant-at-Arms. The votes
Washington,
reported to
February 17, 1801. The House of Representatives. You are there.
CBS takes you back 147 years. It is less than a generation since the end of the revolution which established the United States of America. Now the young republic faces the threat of another revolution arising out of a deadlocked presidential election. All things are as they were then, except for one thing. When CBS is there...
You are there.
You Are There is produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon. And Walter Hamden plays Thomas Jefferson in today's broadcast. You Are There is based on authentic historical fact and quotation. And now...
1801. The gallery of the House of Representatives and John Daly.
This dramatic deadlock has come about in spite of the fact that Jefferson received the majority of the popular vote. A group of willful men in the Federalist Party, losers in the popular vote, are still trying desperately to block the people's choice. A tie in the Electoral College through this election into the House of Representatives, and here the Federalists are still hoping to elect Aaron Burr when he was meant to be Jefferson's running mate on the successful Democratic-Republican ticket. They think of Aaron Burr, a lesser evil than Thomas Jefferson. And now, on the 36th ballot, they're still pushing Burr against Jefferson for president. This confused situation. The Speaker of the House, Mr. Theodore Sedgwick, is pounding the gavel, and it looks as if the 36th ballot is about to be taken, so over to the rostrum.
The gentleman from Delaware, the Honorable James A. Bayard, has requested that we postpone the balloting for 30 minutes. Are there any objections?
Mr. Speaker, we've been confined to this hall for 6 days. We're like prisoners, eating here, sleeping here, going about in our nightcaps, never permitted to go to our hearths and homes. Why must we have further delay?
May I remind the gentleman that his colleague from Maryland is also dying here? If he can risk his life, we can risk another half hour. Are there any objections? I hear none. The request is granted. The 36th ballot will begin in 30 minutes.
And as you heard, a delay in the voting. Mr. Bayard, who asked for the postponement, is the only congressman from Delaware, and it has been rumored in this rumor-ridden capital that Alexander Hamilton, leader of the Federalists and a bitter foe of Thomas Jefferson, is nevertheless urging Bayard to switch the single vote of Delaware to Mr. Jefferson. This request from Bayard now for a postponement suggests that these rumors may be true. We shall see. Anyway, the supporters of Mr. Jefferson everywhere are grimly determined to elect the man of their choice. Around the nation, there are demonstrations and threats by armed men, Jefferson supporters, who are preparing to march on Washington. Virginia, Jefferson's home state, is probably the strongest center of pro-Jefferson feeling, so we take you now to Richmond, Virginia. Jack Walters reporting.
I'm in the executive office of Governor James Monroe. The roll of drums and the bugle you can hear are coming from the great courtyard below. The Virginia militia has been assembling down there since early this morning. I'd guess that there are about 1,000 men here, fully outfitted for a long march. Governor Monroe is here at our microphone. Governor, when will the Virginia militia march on Washington?
Upon my orders, Mr. Walter.
And can you tell me, Governor, when you will give your marching orders?
If the Federalist Party continues to plot treason, we are ready to put it down. If the political knaves of the Federalist Party succeed in their nefarious plot to elect Aaron Burr over Jefferson, we shall avenge this violation of the people's will. I've been in touch with Governor McKean of Pennsylvania. His militia, too, is fully armed and ready. We are prepared to march troops instantly upon the capital for the purpose not of promoting, but of preventing revolution and the shedding of a single drop of blood.
But, Governor, there are rumors that some 1,500 Democrats from Virginia and Maryland threaten to assassinate anyone who takes the presidency other than Thomas Jefferson.
This is a wild story, Mr. Walters, published no doubt by the same inflammatory Federalist paper that accused Mr. Jefferson of the Sabbath massacre of 2 million people, among them women, children, and 24,000 priests. A slight exaggeration. The Federalists' bigwigs must learn that they cannot frighten the American citizen. They should have learned it when the people abolished the Federalist-inspired alien and sedition law. Their plots against the people did not work then, and they will not work now.
Well, thank you, Governor Monroe. New York City is another stronghold of Jeffersonian supporters. We take you there now. Arthur Hannes reporting. Go ahead, Hannes.
I'm in the headquarters of the Sons of Tammany. The members of this so-called ancient order here in Manhattan are gathering in this somewhat ancient building to march on Washington. The men crowding this building, which they call the wigwam, wear Indian costumes and long, colorful feathers. They are men from the ordinary walks of life, the tradesmen, mechanics, and carpenters, the builders of this growing city. Here beside me is a man who calls himself an independent carpman, and he's a fiery speaker who just a few moments ago made a speech calling for a march on Washington. His name is Timothy Ryan. Mr. Ryan, will you tell us, does Mr. Burr know that you make speeches against him?
I care not a tinker's damn for the opinion of Aaron Burr. He's deceived us like a Judas.
Well, Mr. Ryan, can you tell us where Mr. Burr is now?
As long as I have been a member of the Sons of Tammany, I have never seen Aaron Burr step foot in the wigwam. He works through his leaders. Will not sully himself to congregate in our midst. Right now, I hear tell that he's hiding in Albany, 100 miles away. And well, he might be to escape our wrath. We should not only march on Washington to put down the traitors, we should also march on Albany and put away Aaron Burr.
Mr. Ryan, our reports tell us that Mr. Burr is in Albany because his daughter is being married there. But you tell me, as a loyal son of Tammany, Mr. Ryan, did you not yourself vote for Aaron Burr?
That I did, God help me. But I meant him for vice president, as all the voters did. It is Jefferson that we elected for president, and well does Burr know it. We were told to write 2 names on our ballot, and we wrote Jefferson and Burr. And we were not told to designate who for president, who for vice president. Any fool knew if he was on it.
But Burr has also done nothing to take the first place away from Mr. Jefferson.
But he's done nothing to give it to him either.
Mr. Ryan. In any case, according to the Constitution, the House must now make the final choice. That's the law. And you men, aren't you defying the law by your march on Washington?
Oh, defying the law, are we? Well, then I say we shall change the law. Change the Constitution. But let's not the people be deprived of justice and cheated out of the man they voted for. Thanks be to the Lord that we defeated the Federalist Tories by a great majority. But if Burr is elected by the insidious plot of a band of apostates, I say, in vain have we fought for liberty. In vain have we fought the British misrule. I say, upon to oppressors, on to Washington. We have declared we'll be free, and neither bullying or coach will deprive us of our natural rights.
Thank you.
On to Washington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. While we've been reporting from here in New York, we've had word that Ken Roberts in the Capitol has succeeded in arranging an interview with Alexander Hamilton. So back to Washington and Ken Roberts.
I'm in the library of the home of Mr. Josiah Quincy, Federalist whip. Alexander Hamilton is waiting to meet Congressman James Bayard here. And while waiting, he consented to an interview. He has, however, stepped into the drawing room at the moment. In spite of the tensions and threats of violence that are shaking the few buildings in this capital, Washington society has not abandoned its social life. Right now, there's a party going on in this splendid mansion in the wilderness. The music is coming from the drawing room. Mrs. Josiah Quincy, our hostess, is here beside me, and she has offered to tell us a little about her prominent guests. Are they all Federalists, Mrs. Quincy?
Oh, no, indeed, Mr. Roberts. Even a member of Mr. Jefferson's party can find a haven of refuge here from the torture of the miserable boarding houses in Washington.
Even Mr. Jefferson himself?
Oh, good grief, no.
Perhaps he would enjoy the excellent company here and your wonderful canvasback duck.
Indeed, he'd be welcome. But I suspect that Mr. Jefferson would prefer to be surrounded by, shall we say, more loyal admirers at Conrad's boarding house where he resides. Moreover, I doubt that he's given to the singing of psalms. To be sure, even an atheist may love to sing psalms, but certainly not in close harmony with Federalists.
Mr. Jefferson and his minister would deny he is an atheist.
Oh, if you'll forgive me a moment, I'll close the door.
Certainly. There are many notables gracing this home today. Mr. Robert Fulton, the inventor, is in the far corner of this library. Mr. Fulton is trying to raise capital for a new invention of his, a missile that can be fired underwater from a submarine vessel. Well, Mrs. Quincy has shut the library door, and Gouverneur Morris, the senator from New York, has come into the library with her. They're chatting now, and in a moment, Mrs. Quincy should be with us again. Right now, I can see Robert Fulton thumbing through a volume of Shakespeare. The English playwright is quite a favorite in this library. As a matter of fact, anything English is preferred in the home of a Federalist. Mrs. Quincy told me a blue ribbon evening was passed here last night when the senator from Kentucky read The Merry Wives of Windsor and the first act of Hamlet to the ladies. Oh, thank you.
Meanwhile, I brought you Gouverneur Morris, but you mustn't ask him any questions about politics.
Thank you, Mrs. Quincy. And thank you, Senator Morris. Do you think, Senator, that Mr. Hamilton will persuade Bayard of Delaware to break the deadlock today by voting for Jefferson?
Oh, now, please, no embarrassing questions. Senator Morris has just ended a very weary and dangerous trip from New York. Ask the senator how he liked Washington.
Senator, how do you like Washington?
Washington's fine. I almost got lost in the woods through Maryland, but Washington's fine. We only need here houses, cellars, kitchens, scholarly men, amiable women. You, of course, my dear Mrs. Quincy, are the exquisite exception.
Thank you, Senator Morris.
And a few more trifles are needed here to possess a perfect city. In a word, this is the best city in the world to live in the future.
We hope so, Senator. But as you know, there are threats of destruction of this capital by armed militia from Virginia and Pennsylvania if Jefferson is not chosen today. Do you think Hamilton will save the capital today by seeing...
You promised no questions on politics, Mr. Roberts, and I see that you're leading to a question on Hamilton again.
My dear, Washington is drunk with politics. The Federalists are like drunken men in their hatred for Jefferson. They believe that Jefferson's ideas on government are ideas of the rabble of revolutionary France. But Mr. Hamilton, alone among the Federalists, has remained sober. He believes, and I agree with him, that if the people want Jefferson, they must have him. A government must be fitted to a nation as a coat to an individual.
Thank you, Senator Gouverneur Morris. Now, the door of the library has just been opened and Mr. Hamilton has come in. He's coming toward our microphone. Mr. Hamilton, is it true that you are trying to persuade Mr. Bayard to cast his vote against Aaron Burr on the 36th ballot?
It is true that I am against the cattle line of America becoming, in fact, the man of our party. Mr. Burr is far more cunning than wise, far more dexterous than able. If Mr. Burr acts ill, we must share in the blame and disgrace.
But, Mr. Hamilton, if your pressure to defeat Burr is effective, won't you then, in fact, be electing your greatest enemy, Thomas Jefferson?
Mr. Jefferson's ideas of democracy are a danger to our country. And the prospects of our country under the evil of foreign democratic doctrines and French Jacobism are far from brilliant. The mass of the people are far from sound. Democracy is the most visionary theory. Democracy is a disease, the poison of which is most virulent.
Mr. Hamilton, to what specific ideas in the platform of Jefferson are you opposed?
Mr. Jefferson would have a government with no army, no navy. A national defense not by arms, but by embargoes, and as little government as possible from within. These are the pernicious dreams which put our country on the steep descent to ruin.
But if you are opposed to the democracy of Mr. Jefferson and opposed to the politics of Mr. Burr, how are you urging Mr. Bayard to vote?
That will be for Mr. Bayard to decide. But for heaven's sake, let not the Federalist Party be responsible for the elevation of Burr. There is a man in the world I ought to despise, it is Jefferson. But the public good must be paramount to every private consideration.
I'm afraid I'll have to take Mr. Hamilton away now, Mr. Roberts. Congressman Baird has arrived.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton.
Not at all.
This is Ken Roberts. I return you now to John Daly in the House of Representatives.
In this committee room of the House of Representatives lies Congressman Joseph H. Nicholson of Maryland. He is the representative referred to earlier by the Speaker of the House as the man who is risking his life here. Congressman Nicholson has just come out of a coma, the result of a raging fever which has not abated for 6 days ever since he was carried through the blinding snowstorm of last Wednesday. Somehow, as if by a miracle, this dying man gathers his strength to inscribe the name Thomas Jefferson on a slip of paper placed in his hands by his wife. Mrs. Nicholson has just guided his feeble hand as he wrote the name for the 36th time on the forthcoming 36th ballot. Mrs. Nicholson is kneeling beside her husband's bed, supporting his head on her arms. Gently, she lays his head back on the pillow and turns now to our microphone. Mrs. Nicholson, there are some who say that by awakening your husband in his condition to vote, you take upon yourself a dread responsibility.
It is my husband's fervent plea. My wish, too. For we are both faced with a more dreadful responsibility than the life of a single patriot. We're faced with the lives, the fortunes, and the sacred honor of a whole people. Of some, I know I must ask pardon for quoting the Declaration of Independence. For there are men among us who seek to bury alive this child of freedom, though it is but 65 years old.
But in this room, ma'am, there are many Federalists who have come out of respect and admiration for the patriotism and the courage of you and your husband.
Oh, yes. It is the custom of conspirators to pay homage in the manner that the senators of Rome paid homage to Caesar. I have heard that a certain Federalist fears that my husband takes his life in his hands by his determination to remain here for the final vote, and that this Federalist would not thus expose himself for any president on earth. To this summer soldier, I say, do not fear for your life, for you are already dead. The Federalist Party has been pronounced dead by the popular vote of the people.
Mrs. Nicholson, I hope that your husband need risk his life no longer and that the Congress elects a president on this 36th ballot. And now, if you'll excuse me, Ned Kelmer reports a heated quarrel in the corridor downstairs. Go ahead, Ned Kelmer.
Matthew Lyons, Democratic congressman from Vermont, one of the two states whose vote is divided, has just accused John Brown, the Federalist congressman from Rhode Island, of attempting to bribe him into voting for Burr. Only the intervention of cooler heads kept them from coming to blows. They've calmed down a little now, but Congressman Lyons says he's willing to repeat for us his denunciation of the Federalist representative. Mr. Lyons, as you know, spent 4 months in prison last year for opposing the alien and sedition laws. Congressman Lyons, sir, what did Mr. Brown say that made you attack him?
I have been warning him, but the man is ignorant of my principles. He's an agent of the Federalist traitors.
But what did he say to you, sir?
He urged me to vote for Burr just now, for Burr, and of course I refused. And then he said to me, the scoundrel...
What did you say, sir?
Yes, sir, that's exactly what you are, sir, a scoundrel. What is it you want, Congressman Lyons, he said. Is it office? Is it money? Only say what you want, and you shall have it.
Mr. Brown, sir, have you any comment to make?
Yes, the gentleman from Vermont is a liar. Like all atheists are liars, and all the followers of Jefferson are atheists.
Now, just a moment.
They despise the truth as they despise God. And their hatred for God is equal to their hatred for those who own property.
Oh, what
Why, these Democrats, these paupers, these vagabonds and outlaws, I say take away their vote. Or they will pillage our towns and stain our soil with blood.
Ridiculous. Perfectly...
Sir, I merely want to avoid bloodshed. For if Jefferson is elected, there is scarcely a possibility that we shall escape civil war.
But, Congressman, there are some who say that if Jefferson is not elected, there will be civil war.
Well, then let it come. It is bad, but far less than anarchy or slavery.
And I say that it is the Federalist Party that means to have a monarchy rather than a republic.
Well, better than rabble rule.
But the people will rise up, my dear sir. They will rise up and abolish the indignities of the Federalist Party.
By rise up, sir, do you mean revolution by force?
No, sir, I do not.
That's exactly what he means,
no,
sir.
No, I most certainly do not. My father-in-law was Ethan Allen. And when his Green Mountain boys wanted to storm the jail in which I was imprisoned in order to free me, I urged them to desist and go to the polls to vote for their freedom and mine. And as you see, they voted me out of jail and into Congress. And I shall vote, express the will of my fellow citizens, and continue to cast my ballot for Thomas Jefferson.
Well, that is your privilege, sir, but it is also mine.
Thank you, Congressman Lyons and Congressman Brown. I have just been informed that Thomas Jefferson is expected at the home of Mr. James Madison. Douglas Edwards is there, so we take you to him now. Come in, Douglas Edwards.
Our
hostess, Mrs. James Madison, Dolly Madison, as she's known by all, has informed us that Thomas Jefferson is on his way from his boarding house to dine here. We hope to persuade him to make a statement. To all of official Washington, this new house on F Street is more than the home of the liberal Virginian Democrat. It's a haven for tired statesmen. Most any afternoon at 4, you'll find the distinguished and talented of Washington and Europe enjoying the sumptuous dinners prepared by Dolly Madison, dinners lasting far into the night. This cordial Quakeress brings a touch of warm Virginia hospitality to Washington to thaw the February cold in the frozen mud of the capital. Her parties and dances and card games have won over the bitterest political foes of Jefferson. Dolly Madison is here with me now. She's wearing her famed white silk turban, draped with the large ostrich feathers. Margaret Baird Smith, who writes about Washington society, has said of Dolly Madison that she moves like a goddess and looks like a queen.
Yes. That kind of flattery is reminiscent of my old friend Aaron Burr. Before Mr. Madison and I were married, Mr. Burr's extravagant flatteries and promises were meant to blind me to his true nature.
And what is your opinion of Mr. Burr now, Mrs. Madison?
His methods are the same in politics as they are in love, both deceiving. But let me tell you of some of our guests. They're all waiting for the outcome of the election. We have Joel Barlow, the poet of democracy, and there's a Bonaparte. And here is Mr. Merry, minister from Great Britain.
Your Excellency, are your hopes on Mr. Jefferson or Mr. Burr?
Well, His Majesty's government does not approve Mr. Jefferson's friendly views toward the Jacobins of France. My own opinion is that Mr. Jefferson has received the votes of a minority of free men and a majority of slaves.
And Mr. Burr, do you approve of him?
Mr. Burr, I do not want to seem too critical, but Mrs. Madison's food here is more like a harvest home supper than the entertainment of a statesman.
And I thought you were enjoying our hams, Ambassador.
Oh,
Forgive
but
us if our food is too democratic for you, but we have to sacrifice the delicacy of European taste for the less elegant but more liberal fashion of Virginia. This is Noah Webster, Mr. Edwards. He's a Federalist, but he enjoys the company of writers here. He's a writer himself, you know. What are you writing now, Noah?
I'm working on a compendious dictionary, my dear.
Good heavens, what sort of a dictionary is that?
A compendious, an adjective meaning briefly stated, succinct, concise, containing the substance in narrow compass, condensed, abridged, synonyms, see terse.
I see. Well, as a Federalist, Mr. Webster, will you give us your compendious opinion on Mr. Jefferson and his supporters?
They are rabble, threatening the safety of the state. From my observations, republicanism is impossible unless the poorer classes are excluded from the vote. Witness how the mass voted for Jefferson. Witness how they are now corrupting law and order, descending upon the Capitol with pikes and muskets in their hands. Savages. Primitives. Too stupid, too abject in ignorance to think rightly, and too depraved to draw honest deductions.
You might do your dictionary a service, Noah, by consulting our Vice President, Mr. Jefferson, for a more compendious definition of the people. For here he is now. Mr. Jefferson, this young man has asked if you'll make a statement to him on the election.
Well, now, I believed it my duty to be passive and silent during the present contest, lest some Federalist senators accuse me of being partial, whilst I yet preside over the Senate. But what is it, sir, that you would like to ask me?
Mr. Jefferson, do you favor or oppose the threats of imminent violence raging about this election?
Whose violence? The violence of the Federalist Party to usurp the people's will? Or the violence of revolution that keeps governments in order, to remind them of the rights of the governed?
I refer, Mr. Jefferson, to the actions of the militias of Virginia and Pennsylvania. Should that violence cause civil war or revolution, would you still hold favor with it?
Yes, if the will of the majority of the voters is denied by a cabal of selfish interests bent on the destruction of democracy.
But some argue, Mr. Jefferson, that the public good will be best served by keeping the peace and avoiding violence at all costs.
I know there are men who would prefer that I sacrifice my principles for the guarantee of safety. But I say this is a threat and is itself pregnant with violence. I believe in a jealous care of the right of election by the people. I believe in a mild and safe corrective of abuses which are lopped by the sword of revolution where peaceable remedies are unprovided. Even if force must be invoked, the vital principle of republics is the absolute acquiescence in the decisions of the majority.
Mr. Jefferson, earlier in this broadcast, Alexander Hamilton derided certain aspects of your platform, particularly your belief in democracy. Would you care to comment on that?
Mr. Hamilton has a perfect right to his opinions. He has no faith in democracy. I have. I believe in, and I was elected on these principles: equal and exact justice to all men, of whatever state or persuasion, religious or political; peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none; the supremacy of the civil over the military authority; the diffusion of information, and the arraignment of all abuses at the bar of public reason. These principles form the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation. The wisdom of our sages and the blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of our civic instruction, the touchstone by which to try the services of those we trust. And should we wander from them in moments of error or alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and to regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety.
Mr. Jefferson, those are things that can't be said too often, I think.
Well, that's very nice of you.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. We've had word that the 36th ballot has been taken in the House of Representatives, and the results are about to be announced, so back to the House and John Daly.
The 16 tellers are down there on the floor of the House checking the results of the 36th ballot now. And by the way, we tried to get Congressman Bayard of Delaware to tell us whether he would swing the single vote of his state from Mr. Burr to Mr. Jefferson, but he refuses to make any comment. Sitting up here in the gallery is Alexander Hamilton, watching the proceedings down on the floor, and the Federalist Party leader seems a weary and disillusioned man. Whether Mr. Jefferson or Mr. Burr should win this election down there on the floor, it is going to be Alexander Hamilton who is finally the loser. The congressmen in the House are silent. There's a sense of high expectancy. All eyes are on the tellers. They're comparing totals. Seem to be in agreement now as one of the tellers is writing the results on a piece of paper. But there is no indication, no sign on the face of the tellers as to whether or not the deadlock has been broken. A while ago, there were rumors that the Federalists... a teller has handed the paper now to Speaker Thomas Sedgwick. He glances at it. His face is impassive. There goes the gavel now down to the rostrum.
The results of the 36th ballot. Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, 10.
It's Jefferson by 10 states, one more than is necessary. Jefferson has been elected. The members of the House of Representatives and the spectators in the galleries have broken into wild, jubilant cheering and applause. Jefferson picked up 2 votes on that last ballot, one more than was required, and Mr. Burr lost 2. I'm going to try to find out which state broke the tie and which cast the blank vote. Perhaps it was Delaware, maybe Maryland and Vermont, but we'll soon know. We'll know in a moment as soon as we...
Washington, February 17, 1801.
We're going to have to detain...
The House of Representatives elects Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States.
You have been listening to The Election of Thomas Jefferson, another broadcast in the series You Are There, produced and directed by Robert Louis Cheon. The Election of Thomas Jefferson was written by Joseph Liss. Walter Hamden was Thomas Jefferson, and the cast included Thomas Chalmers, Carl Swenson, Joan Wetmore, Bernard Lenrow, Guy Sorrell, Ann Seymour, Eric Dressler, Walter Grisey, Doris Dalton, William Podmore, Charles Webster, Gavin Gordon, Bert Cowlin, and others. Next week...
April 9th, 1865, Lee and Grant at Appomattox. You are there.
Next this afternoon, great music comes your way from the New York Philharmonic Symphony. This evening, great comedy with Amos and Andy, now exclusively on CBS, and with Hollywood star comedian Eve Arden, your favorite schoolteacher, in Our Miss Brooks. This is CBS, where 99 million people gather every week, the Columbia Broadcasting System.